Hey guys, tonight we are traveling back to a time that's been polished to a high shine by television and video games. We're heading to the Viking Age, but we're not going to be meeting any chiseled, leather-clad heroes with perfect hair. Instead, we're going to experience what it was really like. And a little spoiler alert, you would almost certainly not last a day. This isn't a story of glorious conquest, it's a story of survival. And the odds are stacked against you from the moment you wake up. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're listening from tonight. Let me know your city and what time it is for you in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice isn't a sight, but a sensation. It's in your lungs. A thick, acrid smoke that stings your eyes and rasps at the back of your throat. You try to take a deep breath, but it ends in a dry, hacking cough that feels like it's shaking your very bones. Your eyes are watering, not from sadness, but from pure, chemical irritation. You try to blink them clear, but it doesn't help much. As your vision slowly swims into focus, you realize you're in a vast, gloomy space. There are no windows. The only light comes from two sources: a long, rectangular fire pit that runs down the center of the floor, and a single, wide hole in the thatched roof directly above it. The fire isn't a cheerful, crackling blaze, it's a smoldering, sullen thing, producing more smoke than light. The smoke is supposed to go out through the hole in the ceiling, but most of it seems to have decided it prefers it in here with you. It hangs in the air, a permanent, hazy fog that makes everything look muted and dreamlike, or rather, nightmare-like. You're lying on a raised wooden platform that runs along the wall. It's hard, and the mattress beneath you is a thin layer of straw and what feels like a lumpy animal hide. You're not alone. On this bench, stretching into the gloom on either side of you, are shapes, people, dozens of them, men, women, children, all cocooned in rough wool blankets, their snores and coughs and murmurs creating a low, constant symphony of human existence. There is no concept of a bedroom here. There is just the bench. This is the longhouse, your home, and not just yours. It's the home for your entire extended family, and anyone else who happens to be attached to the household. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, damp wool, stale food, and the ever-present smoke. You can also detect another, muskier scent from the other end of the longhouse. In the deeper darkness, you hear a soft shuffling and a low snort. That's right. In the winter, the family's most valuable livestock, a cow, maybe a few goats or sheep, are brought inside to share the space. It keeps them from freezing to death, but it does little for the air quality. Privacy, you realize with a sinking feeling, is not a word that exists here. Every moment of your life, from sleeping to eating, will be a public performance. Your every sniffle, every argument, every whisper is communal property. You sit up, swinging your legs over the side of the platform. The floor is cold, packed earth, damp to the touch. The rough, undyed wool of your tunic feels like sandpaper against your skin. You look up at the ceiling, hanging from the rafters. Almost invisible in the smoke are long strips of salted fish and meat, slowly being cured by the very air that's pickling your lungs. It's efficient, but it adds another layer to the already complex smell of the room. This constant exposure to wood smoke was a brutal reality of life while it preserved food. It also led to chronic respiratory problems and eye infections, a long life often mental life of wheezing and poor vision. The head of the household, the patriarch, sleeps in the most advantageous spot farthest from the drafty doorway and closest to the relative warmth of the central fire. Status is everything, and it's measured in inches from the hearth. How far you are from that fire is a direct reflection of your importance. And where do the animals fit in all this? Well, historians still debate just how integrated the animal and human quarters were. While wealthy chieftains might have had a longhouse with a dedicated, partitioned-off section for livestock, it's entirely plausible that for smaller, poor families, the separation was far less formal. A prize you might simply be tethered a few feet away from where the children slept. Someone across the fire pit begins to stir. A woman rises, her silhouette a dark shape against the embers, and begins to tend to the fire, adding dried peat or wood. There are no pleasantries, no good mornings. The day doesn't begin. It simply resumes its slow, arduous grind. The communal, smoky, and utterly public reality of this longhouse is your world now. And the sun isn't even up yet. The woman at the fire doesn't acknowledge you. Her focus is on the large, soot-blackened iron cauldrons suspended over the flames from a heavy chain. It's a permanent fixture of the longhouse, a silent, bubbling oracle that dictates the rhythm of the day. She grabs a handful of something from a sack it looks like coarsely ground oats or barley and tosses it into the pot. She follows this with a dipper of water from a wooden bucket. With a long, stick-like paddle, she gives the contents a slow, methodical stir. The thick, jalopy sound it makes is not appetizing. More people are awake now. The shuffling and coughing has turned into a low hum of activity. There's no morning rush hour, just a slow, reluctant crawl into the day's responsibilities. Someone shoves a rough-hewn wooden bowl into your hands. It's heavy, and the inside is greasy to the touch, probably from yesterday's meal, or the meal from the day before that. You get the sense that a thorough washing with soap and hot water is a fantasy from another universe. You shuffle forward, joining a small, informal line of people waiting for their turn at the cauldron. As you get closer, the smell hits you. It's not the comforting aroma of fresh porridge. It's a muddled, vaguely sour smell, a base note of boiled grain mixed with the faint, ghostly scent of last night's boiled cabbage and perhaps the memory of a fish that was thrown in a few days ago. The woman looks at you, her expression flattened unreadable, and ladles a single scoop of the thick, grayish-brown paste into your bowl. You retreat to your spot on the sleeping bench to inspect your breakfast. It's a lumpy, gelatinous mass. There are bits of chaff and husk mixed in with the grain, a testament to the crude milling process. You spot a stray pea floating in the viscous substance like a tiny, green life raft. You have a spoon, a simple thing carved from horn, and you take your first, hesitant bite. The taste is nothing. It's the culinary equivalent of a grey, overcast sky. The primary sensation is texture of gritty, greeny paste that coats your tongue. It's warm, which is something, but it offers no joy, no satisfaction. It is purely functional. This is not a meal, it's a calorie delivery system. You swallow, and it slides down your throat with a certain heaviness, a dense lump of fuel settling in your stomach. You look around. No one else is savoring their food. They eat quickly, efficiently, scraping their bowls clean with a grim sense of purpose. This is so, or what historians sometimes refer to as a perpetual stew. This pot is the heart of the household's diet. It's rarely, if ever, fully emptied. At the end of the day, whatever is left over a bit of stewed turnip, a scrap of salted meat, a few beans remains in the pot. The next morning, new water and grains are added, cooking on top of the foundation of yesterday's meal. This was incredibly efficient. Nothing was wasted, and it meant a hot meal was always available. But it also meant that the flavors would blend in sour over days, creating a unique tang, a taste of everything and nothing all at once. And from a modern perspective, it was a thriving metropolis for bacteria. The mainstream understanding of the Viking diet is that it was relentlessly monotonous. For the average farmer, which is what you are, not a seafaring raider life was a cycle of what you could grow and what you could store. That meant barley, oats, rye, peas, beans, and hardy root vegetables like turnips and onions. Meat, especially fresh meat, was a luxury. A pig or a cow was a massive investment. a walking savings account. You wouldn't slaughter it for a casual Tuesday dinner. That was reserved for major feasts, like celebrating a successful harvest or the winter solstice. What you're eating now, this bowl of gruel, is the true taste of the Viking Age. But here's a little detail that's often overlooked: the bread. You might see a small, flat, unleavened bread being passed around. It's hard and dense, more like a cracker, and it often contained things it shouldn't. In times of famine, it wasn't uncommon for ground-up tree bark, moss, or even straw to be mixed in with the flour to make it go further. It kept you from starving, but it could wreak havoc on your digestive system. And this brings us to a point of academic debate. Was their food really this bland all the time? Archaeologists analyzing the contents of Viking era assess potassium. The stomachs of preserved bog bodies have a very clear list of their ingredients. We know what they ate, but we don't know how it tasted. Historians are still arguing about their use of seasoning. Scandinavia had access to wild herbs like dill, coriander, juniper berries, and angelica. Did the average person make an effort to forage for these to liven up their perpetual stew? Or was that a concern reserved for the wealthy? Some scholars argue that, given the harshness of life, flavor was an afterthought. Others believe that humans have always sought to make their food more palatable and that the use of local herbs was likely common practice, even if it has left little archaeological evidence. We have the shopping list, but the recipe book is lost to time. You scrape the last of the gritty mush from your bowl. Your stomach feels full, but you don't feel satisfied. There's a dull, heavy feeling inside you, and a quiet, dawning horror that this is it. This isn't a special or low on supplies meal. This is the meal for today, tomorrow, and countless days after. The most exciting culinary event of your day is over, and you're still just trying to get the grit out of your teeth. The bowl is still in your hand when the head of the household, a large man with a thick, braided beard and eyes the color of a winter sky, claps his hands together. The sound is sharp and final. Breakfast is over. The day's work begins. There's no morning meeting, no discussion of the day's tasks. Everyone already knows what they have to do. The rhythm of the seasons is the only boss you'll ever have, and it's a demanding one. You follow a group of men and older boys out of the smoky longhouse and into the morning air. It's a relief to be out of the gloom, but the relief is short-lived. The air is cold and damp, and the sky is a flat, unforgetting gray. The farmstead is a collection of a few wooden buildings, huddled together against a backdrop of dark, imposing pine forests and rugged, stony hills. It feels small and isolated, a tiny island of human effort in a vast, indifferent wilderness. Your destination is a nearby field. It doesn't look like the lush, green fields of modern agriculture. This is a patch of rocky, unforgiving soil that has been wrestled from the forest. Stumps of felled trees dot the landscape like broken teeth, and the ground is littered with stones that have been heaved up by the frost. Your job for the day and for most of the days in this season is farming. But this isn't the romanticized image of a peasant happily tending his crops. This is brutal, back-breaking manual labor. You're handed your tool for the day. It's not a tractor, or even a horse-drawn plow. It's an art, a simple, light plow made almost entirely of wood, with maybe a small iron tip if the farm is prosperous. It doesn't turn the soil over like a modern plow, it just scratches a shallow furrow in the dirt. One man guides the yard, leaning his full weight on it to force it into the reluctant earth, while you and another person are tethered to the front with leather harnesses. You are the horsepower. You lean into the harness, the leather digging into your shoulders and chest. Your bare feet sink into the cold, damp soil. On the count of 3, you and your partner begin to pull. It's a monumental effort. Every step is a struggle against the weight of the yard, the resistance of the soil, and the countless small rocks that snag the plow tip. Your muscles scream in protest. Your lungs burn. Sweat quickly soaks your rough wool tunic, which then clings to your skin, cold and clammy. This is the very foundation of the Viking Age. Not raiding, not exploring, but this. The vast majority of Norse people were farmers. Their lives were dictated by this struggle. A successful raid might bring a brief influx of wealth, but it was the harvest that determined whether you would live or die through the long, dark winter, a late frost, a summer drought, a crop blight. Any of these could spell disaster. Starvation was never far away. It was a constant, low-level anxiety that hummed beneath the surface of everyday life. You pause for a moment to catch your breath, your hands on your knees, your back aching. You look at the field. You've been at it for what feels like hours, and you've only managed to carve a few dozen furrows. The rest of the field stretches out before you, a vast expanse of hard work. There are no weekends here, no holidays, unless you count the major seasonal festivals, which were just a brief pause before the work began again. You work from the moment the sun is high enough to see until it sinks below the horizon. Your body is a tool, then you use it until it is worn out. Here's a small, often overlooked detail about this life: the sheer noise, or rather, the lack of it. There's no engine hum, no radio, no traffic. The soundscape is the rhythmic grunt of your labor, the scrape of the yard on stone, the cry of a distant bird, and the whisper of the wind through the pines. It's a silence that can feel peaceful for a moment, but over time, it underscores your profound isolation. If you were to be injured out here, if a sudden raid came upon the farm, there would be no one to hear you scream. Historians often emphasize this agricultural backbone of Norse society, but there's an ongoing discussion about just how much they were able to produce. Soil analysis from Viking-era farm sites suggests that the land was often of poor quality and crop yields were low. This has led to a debate: was raiding a cultural choice born of a desire for honor and wealth? Or was it an economic necessity? Some scholars argue that, given the marginal nature of Scandinavian agriculture, raiding and trading were essential supplements, the only way for a young man without inherited land to build a life. Others maintain that the warrior ethos was central to their identity, and that farming was simply the day job that enabled their true passion. It's likely a bit of both. A feedback loop, where a tough environment encouraged raiding, and the success of raiding reinforced a culture that valued martial prowess. As the day wears on, your body becomes a single, throbbing ache. Your hands are raw, your feet are bruised, and your shoulders feel like they've been torn from their sockets. Another person brings you water in a wooden bucket and a piece of that same hard, dense bread from this morning. It tastes like sawdust, but you devour it, desperate for the energy. There's no rest, no shade. You just stop, refuel, then get back to pulling the yard. This relentless, repetitive, and exhausting labor is your reality. The sagas and poems are filled with tales of heroes and kings, but they rarely mention the people like you, the ones whose sweat and toil made that entire world possible. You are the silent, unsung foundation of the Viking Age, and your reward for a day of this work is another bowl of grey gruel and a spot on a crowded bench in a smoky room. Your day of field work finally ends when the light begins to fail, painting the grey sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. Your muscles are trembling with exhaustion, every joint a fiery protest. You stumble back towards the longhouse, the promise of food and rest the only thing keeping you moving. But before you can collapse onto your sleeping bench, there's another part of your daily routine to consider: your wardrobe. You look down at what you're wearing. The coarse, brownish-gray wool tunic you've been in all day is caked with mud, stiff with dried sweat, and smells faintly of damp sheep. It's accompanied by a pair of simple linen trousers, tied at the waist with a leather cord. On your feet are crude shoes made from a single piece of leather, folded around your foot and secured with a thong. They've done little to protect you from the rocks and thorns of the field. This isn't fashion. This is pure, unadorned function. You own maybe one other set of clothes, virtually identical to this one. Everything is handmade, the product of countless hours of labor. The wool for your tunic came from the farm's own sheep, The women of the household would have spent the long, dark winter months spinning that wool into thread on a drop spindle, a slow, painstaking process, and then weaving it into cloth on a vertical loom. The final garment would be sewn together using a needle made of bone or bronze. The entire process, from sheep to tunic, could take hundreds of hours for a single garment. Clothes were incredibly valuable, not something to be casually discarded. The primary goal of your clothing is survival. The wool is oily with lanolin, a natural water repellent, which is essential in the damp, rainy skinned and avian climate. It's an excellent insulator, keeping you warm even when it gets wet, but it's also incredibly itchy. The feeling of this rough, scratchy fabric against your skin is a constant, low-level irritation, a permanent feature of your existence. You've probably developed a tolerance for it, but a small part of you is always aware of the chafe. You might have a cloak, a simple rectangle of heavier wool, fastened at the shoulder with a pin made of bone or iron. This is your all-purpose garment, your raincoat, your extra blanket, your shield against the wind. It's probably the most important piece of clothing you own. This is the standard look for the average Viking heir of armor. It's a far cry from the elaborate leather and fur creations seen in popular media. Leather was expensive. It was used for belts, shoes, and pouches, but a full leather tunic that was likely reserved for warriors who could afford it. And even then, its practicality for daily life is debatable. But here's a quirky detail that modern science has revealed: Vikings loved color, while you, as a humble farmer, are stuck with the drab, undyed colors of sheep. Archaeological finds have shown that Norse people were masters of natural dyes. They could produce a surprising range of colors from plants and minerals. Madder root created vibrant reds, woad produced deep blues, and weld gave a sunny yellow. These dyed garments were a sign of status. A chieftain's wife might wear a striking blue dress, or a successful warrior might have a cloak with a red border. Color was wealth. Your monochrome existence is a clear indicator of your place at the bottom of the social ladder. You notice one of the higher strata, the women of the household. Her dress is a richer brown, maybe dyed with walnut husks, and she wears a pair of oval brooches on her shoulders, from which a string of colored glass beads is hung. It's the Viking equivalent of high fashion, a subtle but clear display of her family as prosperity. This brings us to one of the most persistent, undebated myths about Viking appearance: the horned helmet. Let's be clear, there is zero archaeological or historical evidence that Vikings wore horned helmets into battle. It was an invention of 19th century Romanticism, dreamed up by costume designers for Wagner's operas. A helmet with horns would be a tactical nightmare. It would catch on a weapon, unbalance you, and provide a convenient handle for your enemy to grab and twist your neck. Real Viking helmets, which were incredibly rare and owned only by the wealthy elite, were simple, functional skull caps, sometimes with a spectacle-like guard for the eyes and nose. Most warriors, including you if you were ever called to fight, would have gone into battle wearing nothing on your head but your own matted hair. As you get ready for sleep, you don't change into pajamas. You probably just loosen your belt and sleep in the same clothes you've been wearing all day, maybe using your cloak as a blanket. The concept of specialized sleepwear is a luxury you can't even imagine. Cleanliness is a relative term. You might wipe the worst of the mud off your legs and face with a damp rag, but a full body wash is a rare event, especially in the colder months when heating that much water would be a massive expenditure of fuel and effort. You lie down on your hard bench, the scent of smoke, old food, and unwashed bodies filling your nostrils once more. The scratchy wool of your tunic is a familiar torment against your skin. Your clothes are not a form of self-expression. They are a tool, a uniform of your class, a constant reminder of the hard, unadorned life you lead. And tomorrow, you'll wake up and put on the same scratchy tunic to face another day of the same back-breaking work. After the evening meal, another bowl of the same perpetual stew, perhaps with a boiled turnip thrown in for variety. You find yourself with a rare moment of downtime. The fire in the central hearth casts long, dancing shadows across the smoky longhouse. People are gathered in small groups, mending tools, spinning wool, or simply staring into the flames. The air is filled with a low murmur of conversation. It's in these moments that the social fabric of the longhouse is woven, and it's a fabric that can unravel with frightening speed. You're sitting near a few of the younger men of the household. They're boasting, their voices a little too loud, their laughter a little too forced. They're talking about a recent dispute with a neighboring farm over a piece of pastureland. One of them, a cousin named Bjorn with more muscle than sense, makes a crude joke about the wife of the neighboring farmer. He calls her troll-faced and questions her husband's ability to manage his own household. The other men laugh. The harsh, barking sound. You, being new to this world, may crack a smile. It was a mean-spirited but ultimately harmless joke. Right, wrong. In this society, you just witnessed an act of profound aggression. What you just heard was not a simple insult. It was a knee. This is a specific and incredibly serious form of insult in Norse culture, one that attacks a person's honor, courage, and reputation. To insult a man's wife was to insult the man himself in the deepest way possible. Words have weight here. They are not just sounds, they are weapons. An older man, perhaps your uncle, overhears the comment. He doesn't shout. He doesn't cause a scene. He simply walks over, his face grim, and speaks in a low, dangerous voice to Bjorn. The boasting and laughter die instantly. The young men suddenly find the floor fascinating. The uncle's words are clipped in sharp. He reminds Bjorn that such talk, if overheard by the other family, is not a matter for apologies. It is a matter for axes. This is the core of Viking Age justice honor. Honor wasn't an abstract concept, it was a tangible, essential commodity, more valuable than silver. Your reputation determined your standing in the community, your ability to trade, to find a spouse, and to be taken seriously at the thing. The local assembly, protecting your honor was not a choice, it was a duty, and the rules for doing so were brutally simple. An insult had to be answered. Ignoring it meant you were a coward, a person of no account, and you would be treated as such. The official way to settle disputes was at the thing, where chieftains and free farmers would gather to pass laws and judge cases. But the thing was often a last resort, a way to formalize a settlement that had already been reached or to prevent all-out war. The first court was the court of public opinion and personal strength. A minor slight might be settled with a fine, a payment in silver or livestock, but a serious insult, the knee like the one you just heard, often demanded a more dramatic response. The insulted party could challenge the insulter to a formal duel, a home gang. This was a legally recognized fight to the death or first blood, fought on a small island or a marked-out piece of ground. It was a way to let the gods decide who was in the right. Winning a home gang restored your honor completely. Losing it, well, that solved your problems permanently. But what if a formal duel wasn't an option? What if the insult was too great? Or one party felt they wouldn't get a fair hearing, then it escalated to a blood feud. This is where things get truly terrifying. An attack on one person was considered an attack on their entire family. If Bjorn's insult led to him being ambushed and killed by the neighbor, Bjorn's family would then be honor-bound to avenge him. They might trade the neighbor's farm, burning it to the ground and killing the men. That, in turn, would require a response from the neighbor's extended kin. This cycle of vengeance could continue for generations, wiping out entire families over a dispute that might have started with a careless word or a stolen pig. The sagas are filled with these grim, multi-generational tales of revenge. They are a stark reminder that life was lived on a knife's edge, and that your personal safety depended entirely on the collective honor and strength of your kin. Here we encounter a fascinating, and slightly bizarre, aspect of their legal code. The law of insults was incredibly specific. There were gradations of slander. For instance, merely suggesting a man was cowardly was one thing, but to formally accuse him of ERG, a complex term implying cowardice, effeminacy, and sexual passivity, was the gravest insult possible and almost always demanded a violent response. Historians are still debating the full social implications of the concept of ERGI. Was it purely about a warrior ideal of masculinity, or did it touch upon deeper cultural anxieties about social roles and order? The exact nuance is lost to us, but the consequences were crystal clear. Some law codes even specified different fines for calling a man a gelding, the mare, or a sorcerer. They had a whole text on mute slander. You look at Bjorn, who is now sitting in sullen silence, chastened by his father. The joke doesn't seem so funny anymore. You realize that you are not an individual. You are part of a clan. Your actions, your words, even your jokes, have consequences for everyone sleeping on these benches. A single misstep on your part could bring ruin and death to them all. This tight-knit community, which provides your only safety in a harsh world, is also a cage. You must constantly watch what you say, what you do, who you offend. The threat of violence isn't just external, from raiders or monsters in the woods. It's right here, in this room, simmering just beneath the surface of everyday life, waiting for a single, stupid word to set it loose. The seasons turn with an indifferent grind. The brief, frantic energy of summer, with its endless field work and long days, begins to fade. The air grows crisper. The leaves on the few deciduous trees turn a brittle yellow, and the sun hangs lower in the sky each day, its light becoming thin and watery. You feel a new kind of anxiety begin to creep into the longhouse, a palpable tension that has nothing to do with feuds or insults. It's the fear of the coming dark, the winter. In your modern mind, winter means holidays, cozy sweaters, and central heating. Here, winter is the enemy. It is a siege. The world outside the longhouse will soon become actively hostile, a frozen landscape of deep snow and lethal cold. For the next several months, your world will shrink to the size of this smoky, crowded building. The preparations are frantic. The last of the harvest turnips, cabbages, and grains is brought into storage. Meat is salted or smoked, and fish is dried until it's as hard as wood. Every scrap of food is precious. The livestock, your family's most valuable asset, are brought into their designated space inside the longhouse. Their presence adds a little warmth, but a lot more smell and filth. The door to the longhouse, once opened for much of the day, is now kept shut, sealed with strips of hide to keep out the relentless wind. And then it begins. The first heavy snowfall is a spectacle of quiet beauty for about 5 minutes. Then you realize it's a wall, trapping you in. The days grow shockingly short. Soon, there are only a few hours of weak, gray light. The rest of the time is spent in the near-total darkness of the longhouse, the only illumination coming from the central fire and perhaps a few sputtering, inefficient lamps burning fish oil or animal fat. This perpetual twilight has a profound psychological effect. The lack of sunlight seeps into your bones, making you feel lethargic and melancholic. Modern doctors call this seasonal affective disorder. To you, it's just the winter sickness of the soul, a heavy gloom that settles over the household. Tempers frame more easily in the cramped, dark space. The same faces you've seen every day for months become sources of irritation. The children, unable to play outside, are restless and loud, their energy echoing off the walls and grating on everyone's nerves. The main activities of winter are survival and waiting. The women spend their days spinning wool, weaving cloth, and mending clothes. The men repair tools, carve wood, and check on the animals. It's a time for storytelling, for reciting the great sagas of heroes and gods. These stories are more than entertainment. They are a vital way of passing on history, genealogy, and cultural values. They are a flickering light of identity in the overwhelming darkness. But the biggest obsession is food. The winter store is finite. Every meal is a careful calculation. The perpetual stew in the cauldron becomes thinner, the ingredients more repetitive. By the heart of winter, the diet is a bleak rotation of dried fish, hard bread, and stored root vegetables. The fear of the food running out is a constant, gnawing presence. If the winter is longer or harsher than expected, starvation becomes a very real possibility. The old and the sick are often the first to succumb, quietly fading away on their sleeping benches. One of the less discussed dangers of this season is the air quality. With the longhouse sealed against the cold, ventilation is almost non-existent. The smoke from the fire has nowhere to go, thickening the air into a permanent, stinging haze. You are breathing in a toxic cocktail of carbon monoxide, particulate matter, and ammonia from the animal waste. Chronic lung diseases were likely rampant. The idea of fresh air is a distant memory, the luxury of summer. And here's a fascinating, if grim, little tidbit: the Vikings had a specific word for the deepest, darkest part of the season, Joel. While this later became associated with Christmas, its origins are in a midwinter pagan festival. The Juleblot was a ritual sacrifice to the gods, a desperate plea for them to bring back the sun and brutal winter. Cattle and other animals would be slaughtered, a practical move as well, since it was difficult to keep all the livestock fed through the entire winter, and a great feast would be held. It was a moment of defiant celebration in the face of crushing darkness, a way to use up resources for a burst of communal hope and high spirits. But the exact nature of these pagan rituals is a source of intense academic debate. Christian chroniclers, who wrote most of what we know about this period, often describe these events with horror, speaking of dark rituals and human sacrifice. How much of this was accurate reporting, and how much was propaganda designed to paint the pagans as depraved heathens? Archaeologists have found some sites with evidence of ritual killings, but it's difficult to say how common this was. Were these plots just big community barbecues to ask for good fortune, or were they genuinely terrifying events involving human offerings to appease angry gods? The truth is likely somewhere in between, varying from region to region. But the Christian narrative has heavily colored our perception. As the weeks of darkness grind on, you feel yourself changing. You become more withdrawn, more tired. The vibrant world of summer feels like a dream. The smoky, smelly, dark, and crowded room is the entire universe. The outside world is a place of monsters, both literal, in the form of wolves drawn to the scent of the farm, and metaphorical, in the form of the crushing cold and the endless dark. You look at the faces around you, illuminated by the flickering firelight, and you see the same weariness, the same quiet desperation. You are all just surviving, waiting for a sun that feels like it may never return. One day, the messenger arrives, his face chapped raw by the wind, bringing news that jolts the monotonous rhythm of winter. The local chieftain has called a thing. The snows have thawed just enough to make travel possible. Though still treacherous, this is a significant event, and the head of your household, along with the other free farmers of your family, prepares for the journey. As a person of low status, you won't be speaking or voting, but you are brought along to help carry supplies and observe. The journey itself is an ordeal. You trudge through miles of slush and mud, the landscape a dreary panorama of brown and gray. The destination is a large, open field, designated as the thing stead for generations. As you arrive, you see dozens, maybe hundreds, of people converging. Tents and temporary shelters dot the landscape. It's the most people you've seen in one place since, well, ever. The air buzzes with a nervous energy, a mix of social gathering and legal confrontation. The thing, or a thing in a national context like Iceland, was the central institution of Viking Age governance. It was part parliament, part court, and part social festival. Here, free men gathered to settle disputes, enact laws, and witness justice being done. It was the glue that held their decentralized society together. It wasn't a democracy in the modern sense, The wealthy and powerful chieftains held all the real influence, but it was a place where any free farmer had the right to have his case heard. You find a spot on the periphery, watching as the proceedings begin. The assembly is presided over by a law speaker, an individual elected to memorize and recite the laws of the land. In a society that was largely illiterate, this man was a living legal library. His recitation of the law opens the thing, a solemn reminder of the rules that are supposed to govern them all. The first case is brought forward. It's the dispute you heard being discussed in the longhouse months ago, the argument over the pastureland that led to your cousin Bjorn's foolish insults. The heads of the two families stand before the chieftains. There are no lawyers in robes. Each man argues his own case, his voice ringing out across the cold field. They bring witnesses, who swear oaths on a sacred ring, calling the gods to punish them if they lie. An oath was a deadly serious matter. A broken oath meant eternal dishonor. As you listen, you realize that the goal here isn't necessarily to find an abstract truth. The goal is to find a settlement that both parties can accept without further bloodshed. The chieftains, acting as judges, are less interested in perfect justice and more interested in preventing a full-blown blood feud that could destabilize the entire region. Their judgment is a delicate act of mediation. In this case, they rule that the land will be divided, and the family of your cousin Bjorn must pay a fine in silver for the public insult. The amount is carefully calculated, so much for questioning the man's honor, so much for slandering his wife. It's a pragmatic solution. Both families lose something, but neither loses so much honor that they feel compelled to seek violent revenge. The judgment is announced, and both men grudgingly accept. For now, the feud is over. Justice, in this context, is a negotiated peace. But not all cases are so straightforward. The next one involves a man accused of secret murder, of killing another man and hiding his body. This is a heinous crime because it robs the victim's family of their right to seek compensation or honorable revenge. The accused, however, maintains his innocence, with no witnesses and no confession. How do they decide? They turn to a trial by ordeal. Here's where their legal system takes a sharp turn away from anything we'd recognize. The belief was that the gods would protect the innocent. The accused might be forced to carry a red-hot piece of iron for a set distance. His hand would be bandaged, and if, after 3 days, the wound was healing cleanly, he was declared innocent. If it was festering, he was guilty, and would be declared an outlaw, a man without legal protection, whom anyone could kill without penalty. It was a terrifying gamble, a literal leap of faith where your fate depended on divine intervention. Or more likely, random chance in the state of your immune system. This brings us to a peculiar and often debated aspect of their legal system, the status of outlaws, or skage armar forest man. Being declared an outlaw was essentially a death sentence. You were cast out from society, forced to live in the wilderness. Your property was confiscated, and you were no longer considered a person under the law. The strange part is that there were different levels of outlawry. A lesser form, few grab soga, meant you were banished for a few years and had to leave the country, but full outlawry was for life. Historians still argue about the practical reality of this. Could an outlaw really survive for long in the harsh Scandinavian wilderness, or was it more of a legal fiction, a way of giving the community permission to hunt down and kill the convicted person without triggering a feud? It was a brutal but effective way of removing troublesome individuals from the social fabric. As the thing continues, you see marriages being arranged, trade deals being struck, and political alliances being forged. It's a microcosm of the entire society, a place where the tangled threads of kinship, honor, and power are laid bare. You see your cousin Bjorn, looking humbled, his father counting out pieces of hecht silver to pay the fine. The family as wealth, earned through months of hard labor, is diminished because of a few careless words. You realize that the thing isn't about fairness in the way you understand it. It's a complex, high-stakes mechanism for conflict management. It's a system designed by a warrior society to stop themselves from constantly killing each other over matters of honor. It's brutal. It's sometimes illogical. But it's the only thing standing between a simple argument and a generational war. And your family just came perilously close to crossing that line. The journey back from the thing is quiet and somber. The mood is nothing like the tense energy of the trip there. The silver pieces, hacked from bracelets and foreign coins to pay the fine, feel heavy in a way that has little to do with their physical weight. They represent months of surplus, of good fortune, now gone because of a few thoughtless words. Your cousin Bjorn walks with his head down. The swagger he once had completely evaporated. The lesson has been costly, but it has been learned. That evening, as you sit by the fire, the same uncle who had chastised Bjorn sits down beside you. He is carving a piece of wood, his knife moving with slow, deliberate strokes. He doesn't look at you, but he begins to speak in a low voice, meant only for you. He wants you to understand what was really at stake today. He wants you to understand what was avoided. He explains that the find, the silver, was the best possible outcome. It was the good ending. He then paints a picture of the other path, the one that would have opened up if the chieftain's judgment had been rejected, or if the insult had been met with immediate violence instead of words. This is the path of the blood feud. He explains that honor is the family's lifeblood. When a member of the family is killed or deeply shamed, that honor is lost. It creates a debt that can only be repaid with the blood of the offender or their kin. It's not just about anger or revenge. It's a social and spiritual obligation. If your family failed to act, you would be seen as weak, as ni are men of no account. Your neighbors would feel free to steal your livestock, encroach on your land, or insult you with impunity. Your family's social standing would collapse. To not seek vengeance was to accept social death. It's a chillingly simple piece of social arithmetic. An eye for an eye, a life for a life. But it's never that clean. If someone from the neighboring farm had killed Bjorn for his insult, your family would then be honor-bound to kill that man. But perhaps you couldn't get in, so you might kill his brother or his cousin in an ambush. Now their family has lost honor, and they are obligated to retaliate against yours. The circle of violence widens, pulling in cousins, uncles, and distant relatives who may have had nothing to do with the original dispute. You start to do the math in your head. You look around the longhouse at the faces illuminated by the fire. Your uncle, your other cousins, the old patriarch. If a feud began, any one of them could become a target. And you would be a target, too. Your life could be forfeit because of a quarrel you had no part in. The safety of the longhouse suddenly feels like an illusion. The real danger isn't just from the outside world, but from the obligations that bind you to the people inside. And here's where the Viking legal and moral code takes a fascinating, and frankly, bizarre turn. The uncle explains the crucial difference between honorable vengeance and shameful murder. If you were to avenge Bjorn by killing his attacker, you couldn't just do it and run away. That would be more murder. A secret killing, a cowardly act. To make it an act of honorable vengeance, you had to kill him, and then you had to go to the nearest farm and announce what you had done. You had to take responsibility for the killing. This public declaration turned it from a crime into a legitimate move in the game of honor. It was a way of saying, yes, I did this, and here is why. Our family's honor has been restored. Of course, it also ensured that the victim's family knew exactly who to target for their own revenge. It was a system that perpetuated violence by its very definition of honor. You find yourself watching Bjorn from across the fire. He is no longer just your oafish cousin. He is a liability. His hot temper and loose tongue could have gotten you all killed. You realize your fate is not your own. It's tied to the judgment and self-control of every single person in your kin group. This collective responsibility is a source of strength, but it is also a terrifying burden. This leads to a question that historians and archaeologists still argue about. We read about these spectacular, multi-generational blood feuds in the Icelandic sagas, where families annihilate each other over decades. But how common was this really were the sagas, written hundreds of years after the events, exaggerating for dramatic effect, like a modern action movie? Or was the Viking Age really a time of constant, low-level warfare between neighboring farms? Some scholars argue that the sagas represent exceptional cases and that most people lived relatively peaceful lives, with disputes usually settled at the thing, just as yours was. Others believe the sagas reflect the brutal reality of a society where violence was an ever-present tool for social negotiation, and that everyone lived with the constant, simmering threat of a feud erupting. The archaeological evidence for widespread violence is there, but it's hard to know if it was from feuding, raiding, or something else entirely. The uncle finishes his story and his carving. He hands you the small wooden horse he has made. It's a simple, crude thing, but it feels heavy in your hand. It's a reminder that you are not an island. You are a link in a chain, and the chain is forged in blood and honor. You look towards the sturdy wooden door of the longhouse. It's meant to keep the dangers of the world out. But you now understand that the most dangerous threats are the ones you are locked inside with. As the men of the household recover from the social and financial strain of the thing, you start to pay more attention to the other half of the population in the longhouse, the women. Your initial impression might have been of quiet figures in the background, perpetually spinning, weaving, or stirring the cauldron. But you soon realize that to see them as passive is a profound misunderstanding. The longhouse is a kingdom, and the woman of the house, the HUS Freja, is its undisputed queen, while the patriarch, her husband, holds the public-facing authority representing the family at the thing and leading in feuds. She wields the real power within the home. This is her domain. You notice this in the small details. When the men return from a hunt or from the fields, they hand their tools and cloaks to her or the other women. She directs the storage of food, the rationing of supplies, and the work of the other women in the thralls, or slaves. Her authority is absolute. A symbol of this power hangs from her belt, a set of keys. They are not just keys to a wooden chest where valuables like silver, beads, or precious textiles are kept. They are a potent symbol of her adjacent control over the household's wealth and well-being. To be the keeper of the keys was to be the manager, the treasurer, and the chief operating officer of the entire farming enterprise. When her husband was away trading, raiding, or at the things, she was in complete charge. She had the legal right to run the farm in his absence, a level of autonomy that was quite remarkable for the era. You observe the HUS Freja of your longhouse. She is a formidable woman, no longer young, with a face that seems carved from the same hard rock as the surrounding hills. She moves with an air of purpose, her eyes missing nothing. She can assess the health of a child with a glance, calculate how long the remaining sack of barley will last, and direct the mending of a sail with equal competence. Her husband might be the head of the family, but she is its heart and spine. Life for her, however, is a different kind of survival challenge. While she may be spared the back-breaking labor of pulling a plow, her life is governed by its own set of dangers. The greatest of these is childbirth. In a world without modern medicine, obstetrics, or hygiene, bringing a child into the world was one of the most dangerous things a woman could do. The risk of hemorrhage, infection, or other complications was staggeringly high. Many women did not survive it. A woman's graveyard might be filled with those who died in their 20s and 30s, their lives cut short by the fundamental act of creating life. And then there was the question of the newborn child itself. Here, Viking society reveals a particularly stark and unsettling practice. When a child was born, it was placed on the floor. It was the father's right to then pick the child up and acknowledge it as his own, usually by having water sprinkled on it, then giving it a name. This was called deusavani. If the father did not do this, if the child was born with a deformity, or if the family was starving and could not afford another mouth to feed, the infant could be taken out into the wilderness and left to die of exposure. This practice, known as exposure, was illegal and, in their view, sometimes necessary act. It was a brutal form of family planning in a world with no other options. This brings up a small, fascinating detail of their domestic life: their cradles. Archaeologists have found wooden cradles, but some evidence suggests that infants might have been kept in boxes or baskets suspended from the ceiling rafters. Why, one theory is that it kept the baby safe from vermin and the damp, cold floor. A more whimsical, and perhaps more culturally resonant, theory is that it also kept them safe from the undead, where Dr. Hogge's star. Norse folklore was filled with tales of the restless dead returning to haunt the living, and a baby, being vulnerable, was best kept off the ground where such spirits might wander. The role of women in the wider world of raiding and warfare is a topic of fierce debate among historians. The popular image of the shield maiden, a female warrior fighting alongside men, is a powerful one, fueled by sagas and, more recently, television shows. But was it real? The primary evidence is literary. Sagas like the Saga of Hervey O. Arndt feature warrior women prominently. For a long time, historians dismissed these as pure fantasy, a literary trope. Then, archaeology complicated the picture. A famous, lavishly equipped warrior grave in Birka, Sweden, long assumed to be that of a high-ranking male warrior, was subjected to DNA analysis in 2017. The results showed the skeleton was female. The finding was explosive, and the debate rages on. Was this an isolated case? A woman who broke all the rules? Was she a military commander? As the grave goods, including a full set of weapons and strategy, game pieces suggest, or are we misinterpreting the meaning of grave goods? Could the weapons be symbolic? The academic community is still deeply divided. While it's clear that the vast majority of women lived a domestic life as described, the existence of the Burke, a warrior woman, opens a crack in that certainty, suggesting that female roles might have been more complex and varied than we previously thought. You watch the HUS Freja again. She is overseeing the salting of a side of pork, her hands working with a practiced efficiency. She is a survivor, a manager, a matriarch. Her life may not be the stuff of epic poems, but without her, there would be no longhouse, no farm, no family to fight for honor or to sail the seas. She is the anchor of this world, and her strength is quiet, constant, and absolute. The winter drags on, and the close confines of the longhouse become more and more oppressive. The air is a thick soup of smoke, animal smells, and unwashed humanity. It's in this prolonged intimacy that you become acutely aware of another aspect of daily life that modern romanticism tends to gloss over: hygiene, or, more accurately, the near-total lack of it. You've probably heard the popular myth that Vikings were actually very clean. This idea comes from a few sources. One is an English chronicler, John of Wallingford, who complained that the Viking men were too well-groomed, combing their hair daily, bathing weekly on Saturdays, and changing their clothes often, which made them unfairly attractive to English women. Another source is the sheer number of grooming tools found in Viking graves: combs made of bone or antler, tweezers, and even smaller spoons for cleaning out wax. So they must have been clean, right? Well, it's a matter of perspective. Compared to some other European cultures of the time, perhaps they were more attentive to their hair and beards. A well-kept beard and combed hair were signs of a respectable man, not a thrall or an outlaw. The Saturday bath, the word for Saturday in Old Norse, laugardachur, literally means washing day, was likely a real practice, but their definition of clean endures are worlds apart. Let's start with that weekly bath. It wouldn't involve a private, hot shower with scented soap. It would be a communal affair, likely in a nearby river during the summer. or using a tub of heated water in a bath ashore inside the longhouse in winter. The water would be used by multiple people, and soap, as we know it, didn't exist. They used a harsh, lye-based substance that would have been rough on the skin, or they simply scrubbed with water and coarse cloth. It was better than nothing, but it wasn't a deep clean. Now, consider the environment you're living in. You sleep on straw that's likely infested with lice and fleas. You share your living space with livestock. The floor is packed earth, which can never be truly cleaned. Human waste is disposed of in a simple pit toilet outside, but chamber pots might be used inside at night, and their contents not always promptly removed. Food is cooked in a perpetually used cauldron. You eat from a bowl that's been wiped, not washed. The result of all this is a paradise for parasites. This is not speculation, it's archaeological fact. Scientists have analyzed the soil from Viking era Cesspetescent, the remains found in preserved bodies. The evidence is overwhelming. The average Viking was riddled with intestinal parasites. Roundworms, whipworms, and tapeworms were constant, unwelcome companions, draining nutrients from their hosts and causing chronic digestive issues. You would likely have a constant, low-level stomachache and other unpleasant symptoms that you would just consider a normal part of being alive. And here's a particularly cringe-worthy little detail. Those beautiful, intricate combs they used, they weren't just for styling. Microscopic analysis of Viking combs has shown that they are often filled with the remains of head, lice and their eggs. The fine-toothed combs were an essential tool in a never-ending war against these tiny pests. So, when you see a Viking combing his magnificent beard in a movie, you can imagine HES not just doing it for looks, HES performing pest control. This brings us to a debate among historians and archaeologists about the very nature of their cleanliness. Did the sagas and the English chronicler create a myth of the clean Viking? Some scholars argue yes, that the reality for the average farmer was a state of filth that we can barely comprehend. The grooming tools, they suggest, were status symbols for the wealthy, not everyday items for the common person. They argue that the romanticized image of the clean Viking is a modern projection, a desire to make our historical ancestors more palatable to us. Other scholars push back, arguing that you can't judge them by modern standards. In their context, a weekly bath and daily hair combing was a significant commitment to personal hygiene. They argue that the presence of parasites was an unavoidable fact of life for nearly everyone in the pre-modern world, and that the Vikings were likely doing their best with the knowledge and resources they had. The debate isn't about whether they were objectively clean by our standards, they weren't, but about how they perceived cleanliness themselves, and whether it was a cultural value or just a practical concern. You scratch an itch on your scalp, a reflexive action you perform a dozen times a day. You try not to think about what might be causing it. You look at the people around you. Their faces grimy with soot, their clothes stained, their hair lank with grease despite the combing. The romantic image of the heroic, handsome Viking shatters into 1,000 greasy, flea-bitten pieces. These are people enduring conditions that would horrify a modern health inspector. They are tough, they are resilient, but they are definitely not clean, and the constant, unseen battle being waged in their digestive tracts and on their scalps is just another of the many invisible struggles of their daily survival. Spring finally arrives, not as a gentle awakening, but as a muddy, chaotic melt. The world turns into a swamp of slush and dirt, but with the thaw comes a new energy, a new purpose that ripples through the longhouse. The ice on the fjords is breaking up. The sea, that great, gray highway, is open for business again. For some men in the household, the focus shifts from the farm to the water. The season of raiding and trading is about to begin. One morning, the head of the household announces that a ship is being prepared. It's not a grand expedition led by a legendary king, it's a more modest venture. A local chieftain is gathering crews for a voyage west, across the sea, towards the lands of the English. The goal is a mix of trade and, if the opportunity presents itself, Strand Haga coastal raid for quick, easy plunder. Your cousin Bjorn, his confidence now restored after a winter of humility, is going, and to your horror, it's been decided that you will go too. You're young, strong enough, and they need another pair of hands to pull an oar. You follow the small group of men from your farm down to the shore of the fjord, and there you see it for the first time, a Viking longship. Your heart might leap for a moment. It's an icon, a vessel of legend. It's long, sleek, and elegant, with a high, curving prow carved into the menacing shape of a dragon's head. It looks both beautiful and terrifying, a predator resting on the water. But as you get closer, the glamour fades, and the harsh reality sets in. The ship, a type known as a carver, a smaller SKEI, is much smaller than you imagined. It's completely open to the elements. There is no cabin, no shelter, no deck. It is, in essence, a very long, beautifully crafted canoe. The deck is just a series of loose floorboards laid over the crossed beams. Beneath them is a small space where supplies and any potential loot will be stored. You're told to find a place on one of the rowing benches. These are simple wooden chests, called sea chests, where each man will store his meager personal belongings: a spare tunic, a whetstone for his axe, maybe a bit of dried fish. This chest is your seat, your storage locker, and your only piece of personal space on a journey that could last for weeks. You sit down. The space is incredibly cramped. Your knees are practically touching the back of the man in front of you. You will be shoulder to shoulder with your shipmates, a proximity that will quickly become suffocating. The ship is loaded with supplies, barrels of fresh water which will quickly go stale, sacks of hardtack bread, salted meat, and dried fish. There are also weapon spears, shields, and axes. Your weapon is a simple wood axe, the same kind you use for chopping firewood. A sword is a weapon of the rich, a status symbol. An axe is a tool that can also be used to kill. The shields are round, wooden discs with a central iron boss. They are lined up along the gunwale, the top edge of the ship's hull, offering a small amount of extra protection from weights and arrows. They look impressive, but they also underscore how exposed you are. The genius of the longship's design is its shallow draft. This means it doesn't sit deep in the water, allowing it to navigate rivers and be beached on almost any shore. This is what made it such an effective raiding vessel. It could appear seemingly from nowhere, striking deep inland before anyone could mount a defense. But this same shallow draft makes it incredibly unstable in rough seas. In a storm, it will buck and roll like a wild animal. Here's a small, ingenious detail about the ship's construction: the mast. In the center of the ship is a single, large mast designed to hold a square sail. But this mast could be lowered and raised. When sailing in open water with a favorable wind, the sail did the work. But when raiding up a river, or when the wind was against them, the mast would be taken down and stored, and the crew would have to row. This versatility was key to its success. As the last of the men clamber aboard, about 30 of you in total, the ship is pushed off from the shore. The dragon prow swings out to face the open water of the fjord. The sail, a large square of heavy, rolling cloth, possibly dyed with stripes of red and white, is hoisted. It catches the wind with a satisfying thump, and the ship begins to move. But there is a lingering academic question about these magnificent sails. We know they were made of wool, which had to be coated in lanolin and fat to be water resistant. Making one of these sails was an epic undertaking, requiring the wool from hundreds of sheep and thousands of hours of female labor. The question is, how effective were they really? Some maritime historians and experimental archaeologists argue that these square sails were only truly effective when the wind was directly behind them. Sailing against the wind, or tacking, would have been extremely difficult and inefficient. This has led to a debate about how much Viking voyages were dictated by favorable winds. Did they spend a lot of time just waiting in harbor for the right weather? Or were they more skilled at handling their sails than we give them credit for? The sagas often speak of long, frustrating delays due to wind, suggesting that these mighty sailors were, in the end, at the complete mercy of the weather. You look back at the shoreline, at the small cluster of buildings that is your home, shrinking in the distance. The initial thrill is gone, replaced by a cold knot of dread in your stomach. You are in an open boat, surrounded by 30 other men, with nothing but a few planks of wood between you and the frigid, dark water of the North Atlantic. There is no shelter, no comfort, no escape. The legendary voyage has begun, and you are already miserable. For the first few days, the journey is one of monotonous, grinding discomfort. The wind is favorable, so the great square sail is up, and the back-breaking work of rowing is kept to a minimum. But any relief this brings is quickly cancelled out by the other realities of life at sea. You are constantly wet, not just damp, but soaked through. The ship rides low in the water, and every wave sends a spray of icy salt water over the side, drenching you and your woolen cloak. The water pools on the floorboards, sloshing around your ankles. A few of the younger boys are constantly bailing, using wooden buckets to scoop the water out, but it's a losing battle. The cold seeps into your bones, a deep, unshakable chill. The night, sleep is almost impossible. You huddle in your wet clothes, shivering uncontrollably, trying to find a semi-dry spot on your sea chest, while the man next to you snores or coughs, just inches from your face. The food is as bleak as the grey sea around you. The fresh water is already tasting stale and slimy. The meals consist of hard, dry bread that could break your teeth, and pieces of salted fish that you gnaw on like a dog with a bone. There's no fire for cooking on board. It would be far too dangerous. Every meal is cold, hard, and unsatisfying. But all of this is just the prelude. The real test comes on the 4th day. The sky, which had been a uniform sheet of grey, begins to take on a dark, bruised look. The wind, your former ally, picks up, and its sound changes from a steady whistle to a low, guttural moan. The sea, once rolling in predictable swells, becomes chaotic and violent. The chieftain, a man with a face like a road map of bad weather, orders the sail to be taken down. It's a frantic, desperate struggle as the men fight the flapping, booming canvas, wrestling it into submission before the wind can tear it to shreds. Now, you are at the mercy of the oars. The ship must be kept pointing into the waves to prevent it from being swamped and capsized. The order to row is screamed over the howl of the wind. You grab the heavy, clumsy oar. It's a synchronized, brutal effort. You pull, your muscles straining, your back screaming in protest. The man behind you shouts the rhythm, a guttural chant to keep you all in time. The world becomes a terrifying, chaotic mess of water and noise. Waves that look like moving mountains of dark green water rise up before the ship. The sleek longship climbs the face of the wave, its prow pointing towards the angry sky. And for a terrifying second, you hang there, suspended between the sea and the heavens. Then, the ship crests the wave and plunges down the other side with a sickening, stomach-lurching drop, crashing into the trough with a bone-jarring impact that sends a solid wall of freezing water washing over the entire crew. You are completely blind. The salt spray stings your eyes, and the air is thick with foam. The roar of the wind and the crashing of the waves is a physical force, a deafening wall of sound that makes it impossible to think. Fear, cold, and exhaustion merge into a single, overwhelming sensation. You see a man a few benches down lose his grip on his oar. It's ripped from his hands by a wave and disappears into the churning sea. He is useless now, just another body to bail water. This experience, the raw, visceral terror of a North Atlantic storm in an open boat, is the reality of Viking seafaring. They were legendary sailors, but they were not immune to the power of the ocean. The sagas are full of stories of ships being lost, of entire crews vanishing without a trace. For every ship that made it to its destination, how many were broken apart by storms? Their crews drowned in the icy depths we will never know. Their voyages were a high-stakes gamble against nature. Here's a small, terrifying detail about their situation: they had no lifeboats, no life jackets. If the ship went down, that was it. Your heavy woolen clothes would become waterlogged in seconds, pulling you under. Even if you could stay afloat, the water is so cold that hypothermia would claim you in minutes. The only thing keeping you alive is the integrity of the ship, the thin shell of overlapping planks held together by iron rivets. You find yourself praying, not to the Christian god you might have heard of from traders, but to the old gods, to Njehor, the god of the sea and wind, and to Ran, a cruel goddess who was said to drag drowned sailors down to her hall at the bottom of the ocean with a giant net. There's a long-standing academic debate on this very topic. Did the Vikings fear the sea, or respected the popular narrative paints them as fearless sea wolves, masters of the waves? But some historians argue this is a misinterpretation of their Stoic culture. They believe the Vikings were deeply and rationally terrified of the ocean. Their myths and stories are filled with sea monsters like the kraken and the world serpent, who lurks in the depths. Their respect for the sea was born from a profound and intimate understanding of its capacity for capricious, overwhelming violence. Their courage wasn't a lack of fear, but the willingness to sail in spite of it. The storm rages for what feels like an eternity. You lose all track of time. Your world is reduced to the splintered wood of the oar in your raw hands, the straining back of the man in front of you, and the next monstrous wave. You are no longer a farmer, a raider, or anything else. You are just a creature trying to survive. This isn't a heroic battle. It's a pathetic, desperate struggle against a force that doesn't even know you exist. The storm eventually breaks, not with a sudden calm, but with a slow, grudging retreat. The wind lessens its scream to a weary sigh. Then the mountainous waves subside into a gray, agitated swell. The sky remains overcast, a lid of damp flannel pressed down on the world. The ship has survived. You had survived, but the cost is immediately apparent. You huddle on your sea chest, shivering, every muscle in your body a throbbing knot of pain. The ship is a wreck. One of the oars is gone. A section of the gunwale is splintered, and there's a deep, worrying creak in the mast step. Worst of all, 2 of the barrels of fresh water have been smashed and washed overboard. The remaining water supply is now critically low and has been contaminated with salt water, making it brackish and barely drinkable. The initial relief of survival quickly gives way to a new, slower, and more insidious kind of dread. The journey is far from over, and your depleted resources cast a long shadow over the days ahead. The chieftain orders a strict rationing of the remaining water and food. Your daily intake is reduced to a single cup of foul-tasting water and a smaller piece of the rock-hard bread. Hunger and thirst become your constant companions. A dull ache in your belly and a dry, sticky feeling in your mouth. As the days crawl by under the featureless gray sky, you begin to notice a change in yourself and the other men. A profound lethargy sets in. Your limbs feel heavy, your joints ache, and even the simplest task feels like a monumental effort. You feel an old ache in a tooth, a place where you lost 1 year ago to a piece of grit in your bread, begin to throb with a new intensity. Your gums feel tender and swollen. You see another man, older than you, rubbing his legs, his face contorted in pain. His gums are bleeding when he chews his hardtack. A few days later, you notice dark, ugly bruises appearing on his arms and legs. Even though he hasn't been injured, he becomes withdrawn, his eyes listless and dull. This is the onset of scurvy. In a world before the understanding of vitamins, this disease was a terrifying, unmysterious plague of the sea. It was caused by a simple lack of vitamin C, a nutrient abundant in fresh fruits and vegetables, but completely absent from your diet of dried fish and hard bread. The effects are slow and devastating. The body's ability to produce collagen breaks down. Old wounds can reopen. Bones become brittle. An internal bleeding begins. The gums rot. Teeth loosen and fall out, and the victim is overcome by exhaustion and despair. Left untreated, it is invariably fatal. You and your shipmates are watching it happen in real time, completely unaware of the cause or the simple cure. You might blame bad air, a curse, or the displeasure of the gods. The cramped, unsanitary conditions of the ship are a breeding ground for other illnesses as well. Dysentery can sweep through the crew, leaving men weak and dehydrated. A simple cough can turn into pneumonia in the cold. Damp air. There is no escape, no quarantine. You are packed together, sharing the same air, the same food, the same buckets used for sanitation. If one man gets sick, it's likely all will. And here's a rather grim little detail about life on board the Smell. After weeks at sea, the longship would have been indescribably foul. The combination of unwashed bodies, seas and scuffs, filthy bilge water sloshing around beneath the floorboards, and the ever-present odor of rotting fish and stale provisions would create a stench that would cling to everything. It was the perfume of a Viking voyage. The medical knowledge on board is non-existent. There is no doctor. The closest thing you have is an old sailor who knows a few folk remedies, which are more superstition than science. He might have a pouch of dried herbs, which he guards jealously, but they are useless against the relentless march of a deficiency, disease like scurvy. This brings us to an ongoing historical puzzle. The Vikings were accomplished long-distance sailors. They crossed the Atlantic to Iceland, Greenland, and even North America, voyages that would have taken many weeks, far longer than it takes for scurvy to set in. So how did they manage it? This is a topic of intense academic speculation. One theory is that they were masters of foraging. When they made landfall on islands along the way, they knew which plants to gather, like wild berries or certain types of moss that were rich in vitamin C. Another theory suggests they ate the raw or lightly cooked organs of sea animals they caught, which contain small amounts of the vital nutrient. A more recent and compelling theory points to their brewing practices. They might have brought ingredients for a week, low alcohol beer, or ale on board. The sprouting grains used in this process would produce a small but potentially life-saving amount of vitamin C. We don't have definitive proof, but it's clear they must have had some method, intentional or accidental, to combat this silent killer of the seas. But on this particular voyage, your chieftain either doesn't know the secrets or didn't have the chance to prepare. You watch the sick man fade, his decline a terrifying preview of what might be in store for you. Your own gums are starting to feel spongy. A deep, irrational despair begins to settle in your mind, a symptom of the disease itself. You are trapped on this floating piece of wood, in the middle of a vast, empty ocean, your body slowly, inexplicably, falling apart from the inside out. The violence of the storm was a quick error. This is a slow, quiet, and far more personal horror. The days after the storm blend into one another, a miserable sequence of gray sky and gray sea. The sun, when it appears, is a pale, indifferent disk. The chieftain and the older sailors spend hours squinting at the horizon, their faces etched with a worry they try to hide. The storm has blown you off course. You are, for all intents and purposes, lost. Your sense of direction, so reliable on land where you can read the landscape, is utterly useless out here. The ocean offers no landmarks, only the monotonous rise and fall of the waves. How do you find your way in this vast, featureless wilderness? The answer is a mixture of keen observation, specialized tools, and a healthy dose of instinct. The primary navigation tool is the sun. On a clear day, the chieftain can use a simple but clever device, a Solarstein N, or sunstone. This isn't a magical gem, but a piece of naturally polarizing crystal, likely calcite or cordierite, which could be found in Scandinavia. By holding the stone up to the sky, a skilled navigator could detect the direction of the sun, even when it was hidden by clouds or had dipped just below the horizon. By finding the sun's position, they could get a rough idea of east and west. It was an ingenious piece of natural science, allowing them to navigate with a surprising degree of accuracy in the often overcast northern skies. At night, they would use the stars. The North Star, or Leia Arist leading star, was a fixed point in the heavens, a reliable anchor in the celestial chaos. By observing its position and the movement of other constellations, an experienced sailor could keep a steady course through the darkness. But what happens when it's perpetually overcast? As it is now, the sunstone is useless. The stars are invisible. This is when the true art of the Viking navigator comes into play. The chieftain tastes the wind, feels the direction of the swell, and watches the subtle patterns on the water's surface. He possesses a deep, intuitive understanding of the ocean's rhythms, a mental map built over a lifetime of voyages. He might also turn to another, more feathered, navigational aid, the raven. On the ship, in a small wooden cage, are 2 ravens. These birds were sacred to Odin, the All-Father, and were also incredibly useful sailors. The practice, as described in the sagas like the story of Loki Vilgeirson, the first Norseman to deliberately sail to Iceland, was to release a raven. The bird, eager to find land, would fly high into the air. If it circled the ship and returned, it meant there was no land in sight. But if it struck out purposefully in one direction, the crew knew that land lay that way, and they would follow it. It was a simple, effective, and slightly poetic form of long-range reconnaissance. You watch as one of the ravens is released. It flaps its great, black wings, circles the mast once, and then heads decisively towards the southeast. A collected sigh of relief ripples through the exhausted crew. For the first time in days, you have a direction. You have hope. This reliance on natural science highlights the incredible observational skills these sailors possessed. They could likely read the signs of approaching land long before you could. The type of clouds on the horizon, the presence of certain kinds of seabirds that don't venture far from shore, the color and temperature of the water, all these work loose in the great puzzle of the sea. Herein lies a small, quirky detail of their worldview. The boundary between the natural and the supernatural was porous. While they used practical tools and observation, they also believed the world was thick with magic and portents. A pod of dolphins swimming with the ship might be seen as a good omen. An albatross circling the mast could be a sign of bad luck, or even the restless spirit of a drowned sailor. They navigated with science and superstition in equal measure. The most famous, the most debated, of their supposed navigational tools is the sun compass. The theory is based on a single, fragmented wooden disc found in Greenland, along with the cryptic references to a solar stein in the sagas. Some researchers have reconstructed this disc, proposing that, when used with a sunstone and a gnomon, the pin that casts a shadow, it could function as a sophisticated compass, allowing Vikings to determine latitude and maintain a precise course. The idea is brilliant and has been demonstrated to work in theory. However, the evidence for its widespread use is incredibly thin. Only one partial artifact has ever been found. The sagas are vague. Many historians and archaeologists remain deeply skeptical. They argue that this is a case of modern scientists projecting their own technological mindset onto the past, inventing a complex gadget where none existed. The academic debate is fierce. Were the Vikings sophisticated celestial navigators using complex instruments, or were they simply masterful dead-reckoning sailors who relied on instinct, experience, and observation of the natural world? The truth is, we don't have enough evidence to say for sure. They managed to cross the Atlantic, which is a testament to their skill, but the exact methods they used remain one of the great unsolved mysteries of the Viking Age. You don't care about the academic debate. All you know is that, for the first time in what feels like an eternity, the ship is moving with purpose. The raven has given you a direction. The chieftain, using that clue combined with his own internal compass, now seems confident. The mood on the ship lifts slightly. The despair has not vanished. But It is pierced by a tiny, fragile beam of hope. You might actually make it to land. And with land comes the promise of fresh water, fresh food, and solid ground beneath your feet. Following the raven's path, you sail for another day before the cry goes upland. You scramble to your feet, your heart pounding, and peer at the horizon. It's a faint, dark smudge, barely distinguishable from the low-lying clouds. But it's there. As you get closer, the smudge resolves into a low coastline, a stretch of green fields, and a cluster of small buildings huddled around a wooden church tower. This is it, the coast of England. The sight of land does not bring the peaceful relief you craved. Instead, the new, predatory energy electrifies the ship. The men are no longer just weary sailors. Their eyes glisten with a dangerous light. They begin to check their weapons. The rhythmic shing-shing of whetstones on axe blades fills the air. The chieftain points towards a small, seemingly undefended settlement near the mouth of a river. This will be the target. There will be no trading today. This is a strand hog, a beach bite, a lightning raid. The sail is lowered. The men take to the oars, pulling with a renewed, grim purpose. The long ship, silent and swift, glides up the river, its dragon prow a terrifying visage of impending violence. Your heart is hammering against your ribs. You are not a warrior. You are a farmer. Your hands are calloused from the plow, not the sword hilt. You grip your simple wood axe, its handle smooth and familiar. But its purpose today feels alien and horrifying. The ship grates against the riverbank. Before it has even stopped moving, the men are leaping over the side, splashing through the shallow water with wild, guttural yells. It's a calculated act of psychological warfare, designed to terrify and paralyze the victims before the real violence even begins. You are swept along with the tide of shouting men, your feet finding the muddy shore, your mind a whirlwind of fear and adrenaline. The scene in the small settlement is one of pure chaos. A few local men, mostly farmers themselves, rush out with pitchforks and axes, trying to mount a desperate, doomed defense. The clash is brief, brutal, and utterly one-sided. The Vikings are not engaging in a fair fight. They are a whirlwind of controlled violence, their round shields deflecting clumsy blows, their own axes and spears finding their marks with practiced efficiency. There's no honor here, no epic duels. It's a massacre. Your role in this is mercifully small. You are part of the group tasked with the looting, not the fighting, while the experienced warriors deal with the resistance. You and a few others run towards the small church. The church is the jackpot. Monasteries and churches were the banks of the Dark Ages, repositories of wealth. They had silver chalices, golden crucifixes, and richly embroidered vestments. Best of all, they were usually poorly defended, their inhabitants men of God, not men of war. You burst through the wooden doors of the church. Inside, the lone monk, his face pale with terror, stands before the altar. Bjorn, your cousin, shoves him aside without a second thought and begins grabbing anything that glitters. You find yourself stuffing embroidered cloths and the silver gilt Bible cover into a sack, your hands trembling. This is theft, sacrilege, and violence, all rolled into one. The air is thick with the smell of fear and burning thatch, as some of the men have started setting fire to the cottages. Here's a small, often misunderstood detail about these raids. The goal wasn't just to kill and destroy. That was a byproduct. The primary goal was portable wealth. Gold, silver, and other valuables were the main prize. But there was another commodity, just as valuable, if not more so. People. Some of the raiders are rounding up the surviving women and younger men. These captives will be taken back to Scandinavia and sold as thralls, or slaves. A strong, healthy slave could fetch a high price, often more than a silver chalice. This raid is a perfect example of the classic hit and run tactic. They used their ship's speed and stealth to achieve total surprise. They struck hard and fast, targeting the most valuable and least defended points. And before any organized military force, like the local lords FYRD, could be mustered, they would be gone, melting back into the sea as quickly as they appeared. The historical debate around raiding is a complex one. Were the Vikings exceptionally brutal, or just a product of a violent age for a long time? The narrative was shaped by their victims, the Christian monks who wrote the chronicles. To them, these pagan Northmen were a scourge from God, a fury of the Northmen that destroyed Christendom. Their accounts are filled with horror and condemnation. However, modern historians try to take a more nuanced view. They point out that the age was incredibly violent. Charlemagne, the celebrated Christian emperor, forcibly converted and massacred thousands of Saxons. The English kings were constantly at war with each other. The Vikings were not an anomaly. They were just particularly good at the violent game everyone was playing. Their seafaring technology gave them a unique advantage, allowing them to project their power in a way others couldn't. This doesn't excuse their violence, but it does place it in its proper, brutal context. Were they opportunistic pirates or cogs in a larger system of political and economic expansion? The answer is likely both. The raid is over in less than an hour. The signal is given to pull back. You run back to the longship, the sack of stolen goods heavy on your back. Your mind numb, the ship is pushed back into the river. The new captives bound and thrown onto the floorboards. As you pull away, you look back at the devastation. The settlement is burning, smoke pouring into the gray sky. The bodies of the defenders lie where they fell. You have survived. You are now rich with a share of plunder you never wanted, but you feel a profound sickness in your soul. You have seen the other side of the Viking coin. You are not the hero of the story. You are the monster. The long ship glides away from the smoking ruins of the English village, its belly full of plunder and human misery. The mood on board is exultant. The men are laughing, boasting, comparing their loot. Bjorn slaps you on the back, a wide, triumphant grin on his face, trying to share in a victory you feel no part of. The terror of the storm and the slow misery of the voyage have been forgotten, washed away by the adrenaline of violence and the glitter of stolen silver. But now, let's turn the coin over. Let's flip the perspective. For a moment, you are no longer the reluctant trader. You are back on your farmstead in Scandinavia. Months, perhaps years, later, life has returned to its familiar, grinding rhythm. The seasons turn. The perpetual stew bubbles in the cauldron. The fear of the winter dark is a recurring theme. You've almost managed to forget the horror of what you participated in across the sea. One afternoon, while you were out in the fields, mending a fence, you hear it. It's a sound that doesn't belong. A horn blast. Not the familiar sound of a neighbor calling his cattle, but a deep, resonant, and menacing sound that seems to come from the fjord. You look up, your hand freezing on the wooden fence post. Your heart plummets into your stomach with a cold, sickening lurch. Running to a high point, you look down at the water. There, rounding the headland, is a ship, but it's not a familiar trading vessel or a neighbor's fishing boat. It's long, sleek, and menacing, its prow carved into the likeness of a snarling beast. Along its gunwale is a row of brightly painted shields. It is a longship, but it's not one of yours. Panic, pure and absolute, seizes you. This is what it feels like. This is the terror you inflicted on others, now visited upon you. You are the one in the field, armed with nothing but a farm tool. You are the one watching the nightmare unfold. The alarm is raised. They shout. The scream, carried on the wind from the longhouse. People are running, but there is nowhere to go. The farm is isolated, a tiny speck of civilization miles from any neighbor who could possibly help. You are on your own. You sprint back towards the longhouse, your lungs burning. Do you stand and fight? Do you try to hide? Do you run for the woods? Every option feels like a death sentence. The raiders are already ashore, a swarm of armed men moving with terrifying speed and purpose. They are not from across the sea. They could be from another part of your own land. a rival chieftain settling a score, or simply pirates looking for easy prey. Violence in the Viking Age was not just an export commodity, it was very much a domestic product. You choose to try and defend your home. You burst into the longhouse, grabbing a spear from the wall. The women are gathering the small children, trying to shield them. The old patriarch, his face grim, stands by the door with his axe. He is old, but he will not die cowering. The handful of men from your farm form a desperate, pathetic line. You are outnumbered, outmatched, and you know it. This experience, the terror of being the victim of a raid, was a fundamental part of life in this era. For every Viking who went a Viking, there were countless others who stayed home and had to face the consequences of living in a world where this was possible. Your farm, your family, your life, everything could be erased in a matter of minutes. Security was an illusion. The longhouse, your only shelter, can become a trap. One strange and often overlooked aspect of this is the peace grid or GRII. This was a concept of sanctuary. Certain places, like a temple or a thing said during a meeting, were considered sacred spaces where violence was forbidden. Breaking this sanctuary was a heinous crime. However, a person's own home was not automatically a place of peace. While there were laws against home invasion, they were often only as good as your ability to enforce them with an axe. The idea that a man's home is his castle was a principle that had to be defended daily. The attackers crash through the door. The fight is a whirlwind of chaos, noise, and terror. It's nothing like the sagas. It's grunting, slipping on the earthen floor, the sickening thud of axe on wooden flesh. You see men you have known your whole life fall. You thrust your spear out of pure instinct, a desperate act of self-preservation. And this brings up a point of historical contention. What was the primary driver of this internal violence? Was it all about honor and feuds? As the sagas suggest, or were there deeper economic motives at play? Some historians argue that the marginal land of Scandinavia created intense competition for the best farmsteads. A successful raid on a neighbor wasn't just about plunder. It could be about eliminating a rival and seizing their land, the most valuable resource of all. A raid could be a brutal form of corporate takeover. Others maintain that the warrior culture, which prized martial prowess above all else, simply meant that violence was the default method for resolving any serious dispute, be it over land, women, or honor. The line between a feud, a raid, and simple armed robbery was blurry at best. You are disarmed. A heavy blow sends your spear flying from your hands. You fall back, expecting the final, killing stroke, but it doesn't come. The leader of the raid, a big man with a scar down his face, looks you over. You are young, strong, and relatively uninjured. You are worth more alive than dead. Rough hands grab you, binding your wrists with a leather thong. You have become the commodity. You are now a thrall. The raid ends. The longhouse is ransacked. The valuables taken. The livestock driven off. Some of your family lie dead. Others, like you, are now property. As you are dragged towards the waiting longship, you look back at your burning home, the place you once thought of as the center of the universe. You now understand the full circle of this life. The predator has become the prey. The raider has become the raided. And you have learned the hardest lesson of the Viking Age: no one is safe. The journey on the enemy longship is a waking nightmare. A grim echo of your previous voyage, but stripped of any sense of agency or camaraderie. You are cargo now, huddled in the bilge with the other captives, wrists bound, spirit broken. The raid, the fire, the loss of your home and family, it all replays in your mind. A dizzying loop of trauma. During the brief, chaotic fight, you sustained an injury. It seemed insignificant at the time. The tip of a spear grazed your forearm, leading a long, shallow gash. In the terror of the moment, you barely felt it. Now, it throbs with a dull, insistent pain. You arrive at your new home, the farmstead of the chieftain who captured you. It's a larger, a more prosperous version of the one you lost. But it is not your home. It is your prison. You are immediately put to work. Your life as a free farmer is over. You are now a thrall, a slave, the lowest rung on the social ladder. Your days are filled with the most grueling, thankless tasks mucking out the animal stalls, hauling water, and chopping endless piles of firewood. Your arm is a constant, nagging worry. The woman who oversees the thralls, the chieftain's wife, glances at it with indifference. She tears a strip from an old, filthy rag and ties it tightly around the wound. That is the extent of your medical care. There is no cleaning, no antiseptic, no sterile bandage. In the days that follow, the wound begins to change. The edges, which were once a clean line, become red and swollen. The skin around it grows hot to the touch. A thick, yellowish-white pus begins to ooze from the gash, carrying with it a faint, sickly sweet smell. The pain is no longer a dull throb, it's a sharp, fiery agony that shoots up your arm. You feel a deep, unshakable chill, even when you're standing near the fire. You are feverish. This is the terrifying reality of medicine in the Viking Age. A simple cut, a wound that today would be treated with a disinfectant wipe and a bandage, is now a life-threatening crisis. The concept of germs, bacteria, and infection is completely unknown. Illness and infection are attributed to a host of other causes: bad air, imbalances in the body's humors, or most commonly, the malicious influence of supernatural forces like elves, dwarves, or evil spirits. They are fighting an enemy they cannot see and do not understand. Their only weapons are folk remedies, superstition, and the body's own immune system. Archaeological evidence from Viking skeletons tells a grim story. Healed fractures are common, showing they were adept at setting bones. But signs of chronic infection, like osteomyelitis infection of the bone, are also widespread. A broken leg that broke the skin was often a death sentence, not because of the fracture, but because of the infection that inevitably followed. You see this reality all around you. People live with chronic, painful conditions that would be easily managed today. An old warrior limps heavily, his leg permanently damaged by an infected sword cut from a battle decades ago. A child is partially blind from an eye infection that was never properly treated. Dental health is appalling. The coarse, gritty diet wears down teeth, leading to painful abscesses. The skulls of Vikings often show evidence of horrific dental decay. Cyst into floss. A tooth wasn't an inconvenience. It was a source of chronic, debilitating pain that could, if it became infected, kill you. And here's a particularly strange and fascinating detail of their medical practices. The leech craft wasn't just about herbs. They believed that certain ailments were caused by elf shot, invisible arrows fired by malicious elves. The cure involved a complex ritual, a salve against elf shot, which combined various herbs with chants and incantations to drive the evil influence out. It was a perfect fusion of medicine and magic, where the physical and spiritual worlds were inextricably linked. This brings us to a major debate in the study of Viking health. We know from skeletal remains that they were, on average, robust and physically strong, but also that their lives were short and brutal, filled with disease and injury. The question is, what did they consider healthy? Some scholars argue that their concept of health was fundamentally different from ours. It wasn't about the absence of pain or disease, which they would have considered a normal part of life. Instead, health was about the ability to function, to work, to fight, to have children. You could be in chronic pain from a bad back or rotting teeth, but as long as you could perform your duties, you were considered healthy. Our modern obsession with comfort and a pain-free existence would be completely alien to them. Others argue that this is too simplistic, and that humans have always sought to alleviate suffering, and their use of herbal remedies and charms shows a clear desire to heal, even if their methods were ineffective. Your own condition is worsening. The infection is spreading. You can see faint red lines traveling up your arm from the wound, a sign of limb fang. It is the infection moving through your lymphatic system. You are delirious with fever, your mind a jumble of nightmarish images. You are weak, useless as a thrall, and therefore a drain on the household's resources. You are moved to a corner of the barn, away from the other slaves, left to either recover or die on your own. You lie there in the dark, on a pile of dirty straw, your body on fire. The small, insignificant scratch on your arm has become your executioner. It was a sword in a glorious battle, or an axe in a desperate feud that is ending your life. It is the invisible world, the microscopic organisms that thrive in the filth and ignorance of this age. This is one of the most common ways to die in the Viking world, not with a bang, but with a festering, feverish whimper, lying in the filth of the barn, drifting in undoubt of a feverish delirium. You are vaguely aware of a presence. Someone is standing over you. Through the haze of your sickness, you see the face of the chieftain's wife, the HUS Freda. Her expression is not one of sympathy, but of cold calculation. A dead thrall is a waste of a good raid. She has decided to make one last effort to save her investment. She leaves and returns with another figure, an old woman from the nearby village. This woman is not a doctor or a nurse in any modern sense. She is known as a VOLVA, or a Sakona, a seeress, a sorceress, a healer. She is a figure of both immense respect and deep fear. Her knowledge is not of science, but of the hidden world of herbs, of spirits, of runes, and of the secret rhythms of the cosmos. The old woman kneels beside you. She smells of wood smoke, damp earth, and strange, pungent herbs. Her face is a web of wrinkles, and her eyes are cloudy with cataracts, but they seem to see more than your own healthy eyes ever could. She examines your arm not with a clinical detachment, but as if she's reading a story. She murmurs to herself, her words a strange mix of practical observation and mystical incantation. Her first action is surprisingly practical. She calls for hot water and a clean cloth, a relative term, but it's better than the filthy rag currently on your arm. She carefully washes the wound, her touch surprisingly gentle. She then produces a small bronze knife, which she heats in the flame of a lamp until it glows. With a swift, practiced movement that makes you scream, she lances the most swollen part of the wound. The release of pressure is a wave of pure agony, followed by a strange, throbbing relief. This part of the treatment is something a Roman doctor would have recognized. Draining the pus is a basic, and sometimes effective, surgical procedure. But then, the treatment veers sharply into the realm of magic. From a leather pouch, she takes a poultice of chewed herbs and moss and presses it into the open wound. You might recognize some of them. Yarrow, which was known as wound wortent, has natural antiseptic and blood clotting properties, is a likely ingredient, but she doesn't just apply it. She chants as she does so. Tazoo, hypnotic song in a language that feels ancient and powerful. The words are meant to imbue the herbs with magical potency, to fight not just the physical ailment, but the evil spirits she believes are causing it. This blend of the practical and the magical is the very essence of Viking Age medicine. They had a decent working knowledge of herbal remedies. Archaeological and literary evidence points to the use of plants like angelica, juniper, and caraway for various ailments. Bog myrtle was used as an insect repellent, but they saw no distinction between the chemical properties of a plant and its magical essence. A plant was powerful because the gods had made it so. Here's a bizarre and fascinating example of their diagnostic techniques. It was believed that if a person was suffering from an internal ailment, one way to determine the cause was to have them drink a broth made with strong-smelling herbs, like garlic or onion, and then to smell their wounds. If the scent of the herbs came out through a wound on their torso, it meant their inner walls were perforated, and the injury was likely fatal. It's a strange, almost surreal piece of diagnostic logic, but it shows they were attempting to understand what was happening inside the body, even if their methods were deeply flawed. The VOLVA is not finished. She takes a small piece of wood and begins to carve runes into it. Runes were not just an alphabet, they were symbols of immense power, each with its own name and magical association. She might carve the TUR rune for victory in the battle against the sickness, or the UR rune for strength and vitality. Once the runes are carved, she might stain them with the blood from your wound or her own, waking them up and activating their power. This runic charm is then tied around your uninjured wrist. It is your magical prescription. The role of these female seers. The VOL, or plural of VOL, Thalvi, is a subject of much scholarly debate. Were they just village healers using folk medicine, or were they part of an organized shamanistic tradition? Central to the Norse religion, the most detailed description of a VOLVA comes from the saga of Eir the Red, where a seeress named Thorborg is described with her staff, her strange costume, and her ritual chants. She is treated with immense reverence and her prophecies are taken as gospel. This suggests they are more than simple wise women. Some historians argue they were the true religious leaders of their communities, more influential in daily life than the male chieftains who lead sacrifices to Odin and Thor. Others see them as more marginal figures, practitioners of a darker, less official kind of magic seer, which was sometimes viewed with suspicion, especially by men. The old woman finally gathers her things. She has done all she can. She has cleaned the wound, applied an herbal poultice, and created a magical ward. Now, your fate is up to your own strength and the will of the Norns, the weavers of destiny. As she leaves, the chieftain's wife places a small piece of silver in her hand. Good medicine, magical or otherwise, was not free. You lie in the darkness, the pain in your arm now a clean, sharp fire instead of a bloated, dull ache. The runic charm feels strange against your skin. You don't know if it's the lancing of the wound, the properties of the Yara, the power of the runes, or simply the psychological boost of having something done. But for the first time in days, the fever seems to recede just a little. A tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignites within you. You might just survive this, but you will forever be marked, not just by the physical scar on your arm, but by the memory of this brush with the world of spirits and sorcery. Miraculously, you begin to recover, whether it was the VOLVA, that's intervention, the lancing of the wound, or simply your own immune system finally winning the war. The fever breaks. The angry redness in your arms subsides to a dull purple, and the wound slowly begins to scab over. You are weak, emaciated, and forever scarred, but you are alive. You are moved from the barn back to the thrall's corner of the longhouse, the functioning asset once more. As you regain your strength, you become more attuned to the invisible world that your captors inhabit. Your brush with death has made you sensitive to the deep-seated fears and beliefs that govern their lives. You realize that their world is not just populated by humans and animals. It is crowded with a vast and bewildering array of supernatural beings, and the line between their world and yours is terrifyingly thin. Their cosmology is a constant, looming presence. They live in Midgard, the Middle Earth, but they are acutely aware of the other realms. Above them is Asgard, the home of the powerful but fickle Ser-gods like Odin, Thor, and Frigg. Below them is the shadowy realm of Hel, the land of the dishonorable dead, and all around them, coexisting in the landscape, is Jotunheim, the land of the giants Jot-Nar, ancient and chaotic beings who are the sworn enemies of the gods. This isn't an abstract theology, it's a practical reality. A sudden thunderstorm isn't just a weather phenomenon, it's Thor riding his chariot across the sky, his hammer Mjolnir creating the thunder and lightning as he battles giants. A crop failure isn't just bad luck, it could be the displeasure of Freyja, the goddess of fertility. You don't just hope for a safe voyage, you make a sacrifice to Enjaor, the god of the sea, to appease him. But the fear of the great gods is remote compared to the fear of the local spirits, the little people who inhabit the world right alongside you. They are called the land VTT, or land wights. These are the spirits of the land itself, of the hills, the rivers, the forests, and even of the farm. You must be careful not to offend them. You might leave out a bowl of milk or porridge as an offering to the spirit of the far, the 2mter'ness, to keep him happy. If you anger him, your tools will go missing, your livestock will fall ill, and your luck will turn sour. The wilderness is especially dangerous. The deep forests are the domain of trolls, monstrous and dim-witted brutes who prey on unwary travelers. The mountains are home to dwarfs, master craftsmen who live underground and are known for their greed and trickery. Even the water is filled with perils beyond drowning. The Nixie or Nkkan is a malevolent water spirit that can lure you to your death with its beautiful music. This belief system instilled a constant, low-level anxiety. Every unexplained event, every creak in the longhouse at night, every shadow at the edge of the forest could be a sign of supernatural activity. Your life was lived under the constant observation of 1,000 unseen eyes, many of them hostile. Here's a peculiar and specific example of this belief in action. The dragon prowls on their long ships. While they certainly looked intimidating to their enemies, they also had a supernatural purpose. The Icelandic Book of Laws, the Geographic, stated that a ship must remove its gaping head or yawning beast prow when approaching land. Why? To avoid frightening the land VTT. Arriving with your dragon head up was an act of aggression not just against the human inhabitants, but against the spirits of the land itself. It was considered profoundly bad for a kind of spiritual pollution. This brings us to a major point of debate among scholars of Old Norse religion. How much of what we know about their beliefs is actually authentic? Our primary sources for Norse mythology, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, were written down by Christians like Snorri Sturluson in Iceland, centuries after the Viking Age had ended and the country had converted. This creates a huge problem. How much did Snorri and others edit, reinterpret, or misunderstand the original pagan beliefs? Did they try to fit the chaotic, polytheistic Norse pantheon into a more structured, almost classical framework that would make sense to a medieval Christian audience? Some scholars argue that the EDDs are a fairly reliable window into the pre-Christian worldview. They believe that Snorri was a careful historian, preserving the traditions of his ancestors as accurately as he could. Others are far more skeptical. They argue that the EDDs are more of a eulogy for a dead religion than an accurate textbook. They suggest that the real Viking religion might have been much messier, more local, and more focused on ritual and cult practice than on the grand, sweeping narratives about Odin and Ragnarok. The debate over the authenticity of the EDD is one of the most fundamental and contentious issues in Norse studies. You, however, are not concerned with the academic nuances. You are living the reality. You see the chieftain's wife carefully avoiding a certain large rock in the field, a place believed to be the home of a powerful land spirit. You see a man spit and make a sign to ward off evil when he thinks he hears an owl hoot in the daytime. A terrible omen. You learn to step carefully, to speak softly, to acknowledge the powers that reside in the landscape. You live in a world that is enchanted, in the oldest and most terrifying sense of the word. The gods are real, the monsters are real, the spirits are real. They are your neighbors, and they are not always friendly. This constant, simmering fear of the unseen is just another layer of the psychological burden you must carry every day simply to survive. Your scar has faded to a silvery line on your arm, a permanent reminder of your brush with death. You have survived, but your life is not your own. You are a thrall. The word itself carries a weight of utter finality. In the rigid, three-tiered society of the Viking Age, LS the aristocracy calls the free farmers, and thralls the slaves. You are at the absolute bottom. Your existence is defined by work. You are the first to rise and the last to sleep. You do the jobs no one else wants, the dirtiest, the most dangerous, the most demeaning. You haul rocks from the fields. You dig drainage ditches in the freezing mud. You clean the animal pens, your hands constantly plunged into filth. You are, in essence, a piece of talking livestock. You are owned. The master of the house, the chieftain who captured you, can do with you as he pleases. He can sell you, trade you, or even kill you with no legal consequence. Your life has no more value than that of a cow or a pig. In fact, some law codes assign a higher monetary value to a prize ox than to a thrall. You have no rights, no property, no voice at the thing. You are socially and legally invisible. The other thralls are your only community, a motley collection of the unfortunate. Some, like you, were captured in raids. Others were born into slavery, the children of other thralls. Some might even be local people who fell into debt and were forced to sell themselves into servitude. You share a common misery, but there is little comfort in it. Everyone is exhausted, malnourished, and living in a state of perpetual fear. The food you eat is the leftover scraps from the main household. While the family eats their perpetual stew, you might get a bowl of thin, watery gruel, or the burnt bits scraped from the bottom of the pot. You sleep on a pile of straw in the coldest, draftiest part of the longhouse, or in a separate, crude-out buddling, huddled together for warmth like animals. One of the most brutal realities of your new life concerns the female thralls. They are completely at the mercy of the free men of the household. They have no right to refuse their master's advances. The children born from such unions would also be thralls, belonging to the master. It's a system of institutionalized exploitation, a dark underbelly to the idealized image of the strong Viking family. And here's a bleak, strange detail that underscores the dehumanization of thralls, according to the poem Rigsula, which lays out a mythological origin for the three social classes. The first thrall was named Thrall. His children were given names that reflected their lowly status and ugly appearance scores. Stumpy, fatty, and lazy. These weren't just insults, they were a reflection of a worldview that saw thralls as inherently inferior, a different and lesser kind of human. Your very identity was stripped from you and replaced by a label of servitude. This leads to a significant historical debate: how important was slavery to the Viking economy for a long time. The focus was on the Vikings as raiders for silver and gold. But many historians now argue that the slave trade was a primary driver of the Viking expansion. They weren't just raiding for loot, they were raiding for people. The demand for slaves was enormous, not just in Scandinavia, but across the burgeoning economies of Europe and the Middle East. Vikings became the great slave traders of the early medieval world, capturing Slavs, Celts, and Anglo-Saxons and selling them through a vast network that stretched from Ireland to the Byzantine Empire and beyond. Some scholars argue that the entire Viking Age economic system was built on the foundation of slave labor. Thralls worked the farms, which freed up the carls and jar LS to go on their profitable raiding and trading expeditions. Without thralls, the longships might never have sailed. Other historians suggest this view is overstated, and that while slavery was common, the economy was still primarily based on small-scale farming by free men. They argue that the image of a massive, slave-driven economy is an exaggeration. The true scale and economic impact of the Viking slave trade remain a topic of active and contentious research. Is there any hope for you? Escape is nearly impossible. Where would you go? You are in a strange land, hundreds of miles from your destroyed home. Even if you made it to the wilderness, you would likely starve or freeze before you got anywhere. There was, however, one slim path to freedom on a mission. A master could choose to free a slave, perhaps as a reward for long and faithful service, or sometimes it was stipulated in their will. They freed thrall, known as a Lason GI, occupied a precarious middle ground in society. They were no longer slaves, but they were not fully free either. They still had obligations to their former master and his family, and their social standing was far below that of a born free carl. It was a partial freedom, a life lived in the shadow of former servitude. You look at your own hands, calloused and dirty. You look at the other thralls, their faces etched with a deep, soul-crushing weariness. You see no path to freedom. Your future is a bleak, endless expanse of hard labor, hunger, and humiliation. The glorious sagas of heroes and kings, the stories of honor and adventure, are a bitter joke. They are stories told by the masters. For the masters, you are living the silent, unwritten saga of the people whose sweat and suffering made all of that glory possible, and it is a story with no happy ending. The years bleed into one another, each one a copy of the last, a relentless cycle of seasons and servitude. Your youth, stolen in a single afternoon of fire and violence, fades into a distant memory. The sharp edges of your grief for your lost family have been worn down by time and exhaustion into a dull, permanent ache. You did not escape. You are not freed. You simply endured. You are old now. By the standards of the Viking Age, you are ancient. To reach the age of 40 or 50 was a significant achievement, a testament to a lucky constitution and an ability to avoid the 1,000 dangers that cut most lives short. But old age is not a golden retirement. It is not a time of peaceful reflection. It is a slow, painful decay. Your body is a wreck, a roadmap of a hard-lived life. Your back is permanently bent from decades of hauling stones and bending over fields. Your joints are swollen and ache with a fiery pain, a condition you simply call the ache, but a modern doctor would diagnose as severe arthritis. Your teeth are mostly gone, victims of a gritty diet and a lack of care, and your gums are a source of constant, low-level pain. Your vision is cloudy. Your hearing is fading. The scar on your arm is just one of many that crisscross your body, souvenirs of accidents, mishaps, and the casual brutality of your existence. You are no longer useful for the heaviest labor. The chieftain, your master, is also old now, his son having taken over most of the farm's management. You have been relegated to the light duties of the elderly, mending nets, weaving baskets, watching the toddlers to make sure they don't wander into the fire. You are a ghost at the edge of the household, a familiar fixture that is barely noticed. Your survival to this age makes you an anomaly. Life expectancy in the Viking Age was brutally short, while infant mortality skewed the averages dramatically. Even if a person survived childhood, reaching what we would consider middle age was by no means guaranteed. Disease, famine, childbirth, and violence claimed the vast majority of the population long before their hair turned gray. The image of the wise, white-bearded Viking elder is largely a myth. Most of the people making decisions and fighting battles were in their 20s and 30s. And what was the social role of the elderly? It was entirely dependent on their status and their ability to contribute. An old chieftain, a patriarch of a powerful family, would be a figure of immense respect. His wisdom and experience would be sought after. He would be the keeper of the family's history, the one who knew the laws and the genealogies. He held his authority until his death. But for someone like you, a thrall, or even for a poor, free farmer who had outlived their usefulness, old age was a precarious state. There was no social safety net, no pension. Your survival depended entirely on the goodwill of your family or your owner. If you became a useless mouth to feed, a pure drain on the household's resources, your final years could be ones of neglect and quiet starvation. In the harshest of times, during a severe famine, the elderly might be the first to be sacrificed, their meager share of food given to the young and strong who represented the future. Here's a small, poignant detail that archaeology reveals about the physical toll of their lives. Analysis of Viking skeletons often shows extensive evidence of wear and tear. Degenerative joint diseases are common, even in the remains of relatively young adults. Vertebral columns are compressed from a lifetime of heavy lifting. This tells us that physical hardship wasn't just an occasional event, it was a constant. body-breaking reality that began in childhood. This raises a question that social historians still debate. Did the Viking Age have a concept of retirement? The answer is almost certainly no, not in any modern sense. The idea that you would work for a certain number of years and then enjoy a period of leisure would have been incomprehensible. You worked until you physically could not work anymore. The transition was from heavy labor to lighter labor, and from lighter labor to infirmity and, finally, death. The respect afforded to the elderly was not for their age itself, but for the accumulated wisdom and social capital they represented. An elder with knowledge and influence was revered, an elder with nothing was a burden. You sit in the corner of the longhouse, the smoke stinging your room-wide eyes. You watch the grandchildren of the man who captured you. They are young, strong, and full of the same thoughtless arrogance you once saw in your cousin Bjorn. They look at you, the old, bent vrouw, and they see nothing of value. They don't see the life you lived, the home you lost, the person you were. They see a piece of worn-out equipment, a tool that is nearing the end of its service. You are a survivor. You have outlasted storms, raids, infections, and starvation. You have won the brutal game of Viking Age survival. But as you sit there, racked with pain, ignored and invisible, you have to wonder what, exactly, you have won. Your prize is simply a few more years of quiet misery, a slow fading into the smoky darkness of the longhouse, waiting for an end that feels less like a tragedy and more like a long overdue release. One cold morning, you see one of the other old vrouws, a woman who was captured in a raid on Ireland decades ago, has not woken up. She lies still on her pallet of straw, her face peaceful in a way it never was in life. She died in her sleep, a quiet, unremarkable end. It is, you realize, the best death anyone in your position could hope for. It gets you thinking about the many ways your own story could have ended, the 1,000 different exits from this brutal world. Death is not a distant, abstract concept in this age. It is a constant, unfamiliar neighbor. It is in the smoke of the longhouse, in the mud of the fields, in the water of the fjord. You have seen it up close, in all its varied and unpleasant forms. Let's start with the most famous way to die in glorious battle. The sagas and poems are obsessed with it. To die with a weapon in your hand, fighting bravely, was to earn a ticket to the best of the afterlife options. Odin, the god of war and wisdom, would send his Valkyrs, his chooser of the slain, to escort your spirit from the battlefield to Valhalla, his great hall in Asgard. There, you would feast and fight every day, training for Ragnarok, the final battle at the end of the world. It's a fantastic story, a powerful piece of military propaganda that encouraged men to fight without fear. But the reality is that very few people earned this glorious end. The vast majority of the population were not professional warriors. They were farmers. For you, dying in battle was a possibility. Yes, either as a reluctant trader or as a defender of your home, but it was far from the most likely outcome. So what were the most common ways to go at the very top of the list? Responsible for a staggering number of deaths is something mundane, disease and infection. As you know all too well from your own experience, the smallest cut could kill you. Pneumonia, dysentery, tuberculosis, and countless other illnesses for which they had no name and no cure would sweep through communities. And then there was the silent, ever-present killer famine, a bad harvest, a long winter. A crop blight, any of these could lead to widespread starvation. This wasn't a quick death. It was a slow, agonizing process of wasting away, a fate that haunted every single farming community. Then there is the category of accidents. Life was physically dangerous. You could be gored by an ox, kicked by a horse, or fall from a roof while reattaching it. A moment of inattention while chopping wood could lead to a fatal injury. And, of course, there was the sea. For every man who died in a sea battle, dozens, if not hundreds, simply drowned. A sudden squall, a hidden rock, The capsized boat, the ocean, was a voracious swallower of lies. Childbirth, as you've observed, was one of the leading causes of death for women. It was a recurring, high-stakes gamble that many eventually lost. The death of an infant or a young child was also an achingly common tragedy, so common that it was almost an expected part of family life. And then we have violence outside of formal battle. This includes the blood feud, which could exterminate entire families. It includes being the victim of a raid. It also includes simple, sordid murder, a dispute over property, or a personal grudge that ended with a knife in the dark. And let's not forget legal execution for a crime, which could be by hanging, beheading, or even the horrifying blood eagle, a ritualized form of execution described in the sagas. The authenticity of the blood eagle is, in fact, one of the most gruesome and hotly debated topics in Viking studies. The sagas describe it in horrific detail. The victims' ribs are severed from the spine and their lungs are pulled out through the openings to create a pair of wings. For a long time, historians dismissed this as a literary invention, a piece of Christian propaganda designed to make the Vikings seem as savage as possible. However, some recent anatomical studies have argued that the procedure is, in fact, technically feasible. The debate continues to rage. Was the blood eagle a real, if real, ritual of sacrificial execution, or was it a fictional horror story that has captured the modern imagination? The truth is, we may never know for sure, but its very existence in their stories speaks to a culture that did not shy away from contemplating extreme forms of violence. So you have this grim catalog of potential fates. When you tally it all up, the good death of the battlefield hero is a statistical improbability. The most likely end for a person in the Viking Age was quiet, miserable, and deeply unheroic. You would die in a smoky room from a lung infection, or in a cold field from starvation, or in a bloody heap defending your home from predators, just like you once were. You look again at the peaceful face of the dead thrall. She has escaped it all. She wasn't consumed by fire or water. She wasn't cut down by steel. She wasn't ravaged by a visible pestilence. Her body, worn out by a lifetime of toil, simply stopped. In a world of such casual and spectacular brutality, this quiet, mundane, and feels like a profound act of grace. The body of the old Irish thrall is wrapped in a simple woolen shroud. There is no ceremony, no great outpouring of grief from the household. Her death is a minor inconvenience, the disposal of a spent resource. Two of the other thralls are tasked with carrying her to a patch of unconsecrated ground at the far edge of the farm's property, where they will dig a shallow grave. Her story, her life, will be buried with her, forgotten before the sun sets. This simple, unadorned burial is the reality for most people in the Viking Age, especially for someone of your low status. You have likely seen dozens of such funerals. The hole in the ground, a body wrapped in cloth, perhaps a single, simple purse in a item buried with them. And then the earth is shoveled back on top. It's a quiet, practical affair. This reality stands in stark contrast to the popular image of a Viking funeral. When you think of a Viking burial, you probably picture a dead chieftain, dressed in his finest clothes, laid out in his longship. His weapons, his treasures, and perhaps even his sacrificed horses and thralls are placed around him. The ship is then pushed out to sea unset ablaze by a flaming arrow, a magnificent, fiery pyre that sends the warrior's soul on its final journey to Valhalla. It's a powerful, cinematic image, and it is almost entirely a myth. While fire was certainly a component of some high-status Norse funerary practices, the idea of a flaming ship floating out to sea is a romantic invention, popularized by art, literature, and film in the 19th and 20th centuries. It's a logistical nightmare. A wooden ship, especially one made of green or waterlogged timber, is incredibly difficult to set on fire in the open water. It would more likely smolder and sink than burn in a glorious blaze. So what did a high-status funeral actually look like the archaeological evidence points to two main types of elaborate burials for the elite: cremation and inhumation. In a cremation, the deceased would be burned on a massive pyre on land. The fire would need to reach incredible temperatures to consume a body, requiring a huge amount of timber. After the fire, the ashes and any remaining grave goods, metal objects would often survive the fire would be collected and buried. More common, especially in the later Viking Age, was inhumation, or burial, for a great chieftain or a wealthy HUS Freja. This could be an incredibly elaborate affair. They might be buried in a large, chamber-like grave dug into the ground, and sometimes they were indeed buried with their ships. But the ship was not set on fire at sea. Instead, the entire longship would be dragged ashore and buried in a massive trench, with the deceased placed inside it as if on their final voyage. The great ship burials found at Osbergranchi og Kastad in Norway are prime examples. These ships were interred on land, covered by a huge mound of earth and stone that would serve as a permanent monument to the deceased. These grave mounds were more than just tombs. They were powerful statements of status and lineage. They were landmarks, visible for miles around, anchoring a family's claim to the surrounding land. They connected the living to their revered ancestors. A fascinating and somewhat macabre detail of these burials is the practice of grave goods. The idea was to equip the dead with everything they might need in the afterlife. A warrior would be buried with his sword, spear, and shield. A woman of high status would be buried with her jewelry, her weaving tools, and the keys to her household. Sometimes, they were even buried with a gaming board and pieces for a strategy game like HNEFTFL, presumably to ward off boredom in the hereafter. And yes, sometimes animals like horses and dogs were sacrificed and buried with their master. The most controversial aspect, however, is the evidence for human sacrifice at funerals. The most famous account comes from the Arab traveler Ahmad ibn Fadlan, who, in the 10th century, witnessed a ship burial for a Rus chieftain on the Volga River. He describes in lurid detail how a slave girl volunteered to accompany her master into death. She was subjected to a series of rituals before being killed and placed on the pyre with him. This account is shocking, and its authenticity is a major point of contention for historians. Was Ibn Fadlan's account accurate, or was he exaggerating for effect? Playing to the savagery of the Northmen for his audience back home, archaeological evidence is ambiguous. Some large graves do contain multiple bodies, often showing signs of violent death, which strongly suggests sacrificial victims, but these graves are rare. The debate rages on: was this a common practice for the elite, as Ibn Fadlan suggests, or was it an exceptional and extreme ritual, perhaps only practiced by certain groups like the Rus in the East? We don't know for sure, but the evidence suggests that for some, the journey to the afterlife required companions. You stand by the edge of the field, watching the two thralls finish their work. They pat down the last of the earth on the unmarked grave. There is no mound, no ship, no treasure. There is only silence. You realize that the grand funerals, the ones that make it into the history books and the sagas, are the stories of the 1%. They are the exceptions. This quiet return to the soil, is the rule. This is how the vast majority of the Viking world said goodbye, with a simple prayer to the old gods or the new one, and the finality of the cold, indifferent earth. In the slow, quiet twilight of your life, you begin to notice subtle changes in the world around you, like the shifting of the tide. They are small things at first, easily missed in the daily grind of survival, but they are persistent, and they signal the end of an era. The world you were born into, the world of Odin and Thor, of blood feuds and dragon pro-wed longships, is fading. One of the most visible changes is in the realm of faith. The chieftain of your farm, the son of the man who captured you, has recently been on a trading voyage to the south. He has returned not just with silver and wine, but with a new, foreign idea. He speaks of the White Christ, the single, all-powerful God of the Christians, He has been baptized. He wears a small silver cross around his neck, next to the Thor's hammer amulet he has worn since childhood. He hasn't abandoned the old ways entirely, but he is hedging his bets. This synchronist, this blending of the old and the new, is happening all across the land. You see a new building going up in the nearby trading town. It's a church, built of wood like a longhouse, but with a strange, tall tower. A priest, a man with a shaved head and a somber robe, now lives there. He speaks of sin and salvation, concepts that are alien to your worldview of honor and fate. He condemns the old gods as demons and the VOLR as witches. Some of the people listen with fear and suspicion. Others, especially the women and the thralls, seem drawn to the new faith's promise of a better life after death. A life where the first shall be last and the last shall be first. It offers a hope that the old religion, with its aristocratic Valhalla, never did. The conversion of Scandinavia was a slow, complex, and oft unpolitically motivated process. It wasn't a sudden spiritual awakening. Viking kings and chieftains, like Harald Bluetooth of Denmark, saw Christianity as a powerful tool. Adopting the religion of the great southern kingdoms like France and England was a way to centralize their own power, to legitimize their rule, and to improve their trade relations. A king who was a brother in Christ to other European monarchs was taken more seriously than a pagan pirate chief. This transition wasn't always peaceful. Kings like Olaf Tryggvason of Norway were known to have converted their people by force, offering them a choice between baptism and a much less pleasant alternative. The old faith did not die quietly. There were pagan rebellions on resistance that lasted for generations. By fascinating and somewhat quirky, piece of evidence for this religious struggle can be seen in the artifacts themselves. Archaeologists have found stone molds from the period that could be used to cast both the Thor's hammer amulet and the Christian cross at the same time. This suggests that craftsmen were catering to a religiously flexible market. A man could literally have it both ways. Why choose between the protection of Thor and the salvation of Christ when you could have both? This brings us to a historical debate that is still very much alive. How pagan were the Vikings at the height of the Viking Age? The traditional view sees a clear timeline, a pagan beginning, a violent Viking middle, and a Christian end. But many historians now argue the reality was much murkier. Christianity had been trickling into Scandinavia through trade and raids for centuries before the official conversions. Many Vikings who raided Christian lands would have been exposed to the new religion. Some may have adopted it for practical reasons while abroad. Was the Viking Age a clash of two separate religions? Or was it an era of prolonged and messy cultural and religious exchange? The evidence suggests the latter. The world was not neatly divided into pagans and Christians. It was a world of fluid identities, where a man could pray to Thor for a safe voyage and then trade peacefully in a Christian port the next week. Alongside the religious changes, you see a shift in the political landscape. The old system of petty chieftains and regional things is being replaced by the authority of powerful kings. These new kings, inspired by the models of southern royalty, are building fortifications, minting their own coins, and creating a more centralized and organized system of governance. The old, freewheeling days of the independent raider are coming to an end. Violence is becoming the monopoly of the state. Raiding is being replaced by taxation. The long ships are still being built, but they are increasingly used as naval vessels in a king's fleet, not as the private venture capitalists of the sea. The world is becoming more structured, more controlled, less chaotic. For many, this brings a new kind of stability and security. But for the old way of life, the Viking way, it is a death knell. Use it by the fire, an old thrall in a new world. The stories the old-timers tell of Valhallan giants now have to compete with the priest's tales of heaven and hell. The local chieftain's power is now overshadowed by that of a distant king. The world feels larger, more complicated, and you feel smaller within it. The fierce, violent, and vibrant age you were born into is setting like a winter sun, giving way to the longer, colder night of a new medieval order. You are lying on your straw pallet, a frail collection of bones and memories. The world outside your fading consciousness is changing, but that no longer matters to you. Your own world is shrinking to the size of this smoky room, to the rhythm of your own shallow breaths. You have survived the Viking Age, and now, in its final, flickering moments, you wonder what, if anything, will be remembered. The people of the future, you imagine, will tell stories about your time. They will probably get it all wrong. They'll likely imagine grand horned helmets, which you have never seen in your entire life. They'll speak of wild-eyed berserkers, mistaking a rare battle frenzy for an entire way of life. They will paint a simple picture of bloodthirsty pirates, because it's a more exciting story than the complex, grinding reality of your existence. They will remember the raids, the fire, the terror. They will remember the monsters. But they will miss the real legacy, the one that is being woven into the fabric of the world, even as you fade away. The true legacy is not just what the Northmen took, it's what they built, what they connected, and what they left behind in the very soil and speech of the lands they touched. Their greatest legacy is the paths they carved across the globe. They were not just raiders, they were the most ambitious explorers and traders of their age. Their long ships, those instruments of terror, were also vessels of connection. They created a vast network that linked the isolated corners of the world. They settled the barren, windswept islands of the North Atlantic, the Faroes, Iceland, Greenland. They sailed all the way to a distant shore they called Finland, a land across the great ocean, centuries before the southern kings would even dream it existed. To the east, they journeyed down the great rivers of the Slavic lands, a territory they called Geographic, the realm of towns. They dragged their ships overland between rivers, trading furs and amaranth fowls for the silver dirhams of the Abbasid Caliphate and the fine silks of the Byzantine Empire. They called the great city of Constantinople Amicalagard, the great city, and served in its emperors, the Elite VA, RNG on guard. They were not just a force of destruction, they were a global transmission line for goods, ideas, and genes. And they left their mark in a way that is quieter, but far more enduring than any monument. They left it in the mouths of the people they settled among. In the parts of England where Viking armies conquered and settled the Danelaw, the language began to change. The Old Norse spoken by the Danish settlers mingled with the Old English of the local Anglo-Saxons. This wasn't a formal process. It happened in the fields, in the markets, in the homes where two peoples learned to live together. The Vikings gave the English language some of its most basic, essential words. Before they came, the English word for the heavens was Hivan. The Vikings brought the word sky. They brought the words leg, skin, the neck. They introduced the word husbandage, US bondi, house dweller and lolhager. Even a word as simple as egg comes from them. This linguistic footprint is a testament not to violent conquest, but to settlement, to farming, to the everyday business of life. This, of course, leads to the final, great debate that historians will have about your time. What was the ultimate nature of the Viking impact? Was it primarily destructive or constructive? Were they a regressive force that held Europe back? A fury of the Northmen that burned libraries and shattered kingdoms? Or were they a dynamic, transformative force that stimulated economies, created new trade routes, and founded great cities like Dublin, which began as a Viking slaving port? Were they parasites on a more civilized world? Or were they a vital catalyst that helped shape the modern nations of Britain, Ireland, Russia, and France through the Normans, the Northmen? The answer, like everything in your life, is complicated. They were both. They were destroyers and creators, savages and innovators. But you won't live to see any of that. Your personal legacy is unwritten. It is the story of a life taken, a spirit broken, a body worn down by relentless toil, You are the silent, unremoved foundation upon which all those grand legacies were built. Your story is the true story of the Viking Age. Your breathing slows. The sounds of the longhouse, the crackle of the fire, the murmur of voices begin to recede, replaced by a quiet, welcome darkness. Your journey is over. And so, your journey ends. The story is over. Let the world of the longhouse, with its smoke and its hardships, gently fade from your mind. Feel the rough, scratchy wool of the past slip away, replaced by the softness of your own blanket, the quiet comfort of your own bed. The story was a heavy one, a tale of survival in a world that has long since vanished. But you are not there anymore. You are here, safe in the quiet of your room. The long ship, its fierce dragon prow now softened by the haze of slumber, no longer crashes against icy waves, but glides silently on a sea of moonlit quiet. The shouts of raiders and the cries of the desperate have become distant whispers, carried away on the gentle night breeze. The ache in your bones, the chill of the northern sea, the gnawing hunger, let it all dissolve into the peaceful warmth of your rest. There are no more chores to be done, no more fields to be plowed, no more storms to endure. There is only the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of your own breathing. The air you breathe is clean and cool. The sky above you is no longer a source of omens or a ceiling for smoke, but a vast, silent canopy of stars, waiting for your dreams to drift among them. You have traveled far tonight, through darkness and through fear, but the voyage is complete. The shore you have reached is one of deep and untroubled peace. Sleep now, rest well. The end of the article. Good night.